Slides are good, audio's good. Great. Okay. We're just gathering in the room. There's a lot of milling around going on, so we'll kick off shortly. Thank you.
Please take your seat so we can get started. Dick. Sorry. Please take your seat so we can get started. All right, very good. I'm Mike Les, OpenID Foundation Operations Director. For those who I haven't had the opportunity to meet before, I'm going to go through a couple quick housekeeping topics and then hand off to Gail so we can get started. We have a full agenda today, so we don't have any break scheduled. Feel free to take a break as needed. Just note that the restrooms are out the door down to your right. We'll just say any time that we have left over at the end of the workshop, we can use that for networking. Next housekeeping item, please note the antitrust statement on the screen right now. I'll just give you a minute to read that. Note that there is a link to the OpenID Foundation antitrust policy included there.
Very much.
There we go. Okay, next housekeeping item, note well statement. Feel free to take a moment to read that, but I will summarize it for you. Basically, it states that a OpenID Foundation contribution agreement is not required to participate in the workshop today, but anything that you do share may be used by the OpenID Foundation. So I'll just leave that up for another 30 seconds or so. Allow you to read it. While you're reading that, for those participating virtually or anyone that's connected to the Zoom session here in the room, feel free to drop any questions into the chat. I will grab those and raise those for the presenter. For those in the room, for those presenting, a couple of things, probably best to use the microphone so you can move around. There is a clicker up here that you can use. We also do have a couple of other extra microphones in the front and the back. I'll try to work the room to hand those out as questions arise. So with that, Gail, please.
Right, as Mike said, we have a full agenda, so I'm not going to walk through everything here, but I think I'll just highlight that we're going to have about a 30-minute panel on AI, which should be a fun conversation. We're going to have a lot of recaps with lead editors and co-chairs talking about some of the work that's underway. And we are indeed on fire at the OpenID Foundation. So just a very quick recap of what's happened in the last 6 months since we last met together. FAPI security profile and attacker profile went to final in mid-February. FAPI 1 was submitted to ISO as a publicly available spec, and FAPI 2 conformance tests now also support Depop, and we're working towards the final version of those FAPI specs or tests. We'll talk more about that shortly. Lots of movement on our DCP work group, including this morning. Thanks for those who attended the workshop this morning. OpenID for verifiable presentation to the 3rd implementers draft, OpenID for VCI to implementers draft 2, and the HYPE profile to implementers draft 1. eKYC and IDA had the OpenID Connect Authority spec moved to 1.0 and AuthSend moved to 1.0 back in November. So well done. And I think that's just 4 of the work groups. I might have even missed some that went ahead. So a lot happening on the spec side. In terms of events and collaborations, we have 4 different work groups that are testing interoperability at the moment. So Shared Signals had their interop events in Texas and then in London in March. Then in the DCP work group, we had the couple of hackathons with California, which feels like a very long time ago now. Joseph also made it out to MOSIP, the MOSIP event in the Philippines. And then NIST, we've been working in collaboration with NIST on the NCCOE program with some small group interops on February 20th, March 1st, and not 4/5, but on, that's actually 4/4, so April 4th, we just had an interop event on Friday. We'll have a couple of more of those to come on 425 and 55. So if you are revving up to support OID for VP or OID for VCI, and you're not aware of those small group interop efforts, then please do reach out to me or to one of the DCP co-chairs or to Juliana, who's also working closely on those various interop events. For the off-send side, they had their first interop event at Gartner last month. And I think that was the one that had queues going out the door, and we'll see a picture of that a bit later. And last but not least, Federation has their Sunet hosted event in Sweden the week of 424. So really great progress, certainly keeping staff on our toes with all of this work. There's also some important progress on the governance and operations. So in the last 6 months, we finalized our process document and IPR agreement, refreshing that for the first time in about 7 years. And then we also have some great work by Mark Hain with feedback from Mike Jones and several of the co-chairs and editors to automate how we check our specs before we publish them. So automating some of those key steps. Last but not least is some of the thought leadership work. And that's, I don't know if I can change how this is presented on the screen so it's not blocking. There we go. The Australian Digital Trust Community Group was approved by the board in December and is now operational. So they may transition to having their own charter like we have with the OIDF Japan chapter. But at the moment, they're formed as a community group and already off to the races and providing some feedback on government requests for comment. On the City Hub side, we've published 9 reports through the penmanship of Elizabeth Garber, and many reports there. We'll talk a bit about City Hub later in today's event. Government feedback there. I personally briefed the head of the New York Fed last week, their Innovation Council, who had an event on fraud and the role of digital identity. Very interesting conversation. Happy to talk about that offline. We also provided feedback on the NIST 2 directive and NIST attribute services. We're also very active participants in the Aspen Institute's Fraud Task Force. So this is a public and private sector effort hosted by the Aspen Institute to try and unpack what are the different vectors that fraud are coming in from now and what type of policy and infrastructure capabilities do we need to address it in the US in particular, but also taking into account the global context. From a blog point of view, we published many blogs in the last few months, but one to call out is a specific recommendation on the use of fine-grained authorization and rich authorization requests. So that paper, authored by Dima, wherever Dima is floating around, thank you, Dima, was helpful for the Chilean Monetary Authority for them to inform their decision-making process, and we think other ecosystems are likely to pick up on that as well. We also sent out an email to all of you as members, providing information on how you could access the OIX content library since they dissolved their operations last year. So we've given all of our members access to that as a benefit. And for those of you that are corporate members or sustaining members, we've kind of incorporated a new benefit this year to kind of do one-to-one briefs from OIDF staff to your team on what's happening within the foundation. Many of these large corporates have very complex organizations, and it helps them to understand what's actually happening across the foundation so they can dial in and take part in more of the work groups and community groups that are relevant to them. Okay, so we're on fire. What's next? There we go. In the media, I won't go through each of these headlines, but applause to the marketing team under Elizabeth and Serge for their work on promoting the work of the foundation and many of these interop events in particular. And certainly the co-chairs and the editors remain very active in different blog and different, what's the forum, podcasts like the Identirati office hours and the IDSA webinar effort. So really good traction in the last few months there. And then last but not least, Okta's recognition of not only some great leaders in the identity field, but a real shout out to many of the members of the foundation and the partners of the foundation who were called out in this year's group, comprising over half the 25 people that were recognized. So this is the second year running that we've had a really great showing and people that were recognized from our community. So well done, everybody. And we're not going to talk about the automation tooling and roadmap. Mark's not feeling well today, so we'll skip that section and we'll go on to Hadari, who will talk to the eKYC and IDA portion of the agenda. Other?
Well, yeah. I just wanted to say, if you, I don't remember if you mentioned it on the earlier slide, but there are gonna be some briefing sessions on Mark's, automation tooling roadmap starting from next week. So look out for those. It's all about removing the manual process, manual checks from,
For the editors and the coaches.
yeah, for editors and co-chairs, excuse me. The question there was, is that relevant to any specific working group? And no, it's for all, it's for the publication of all OpenID Foundation specifications.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Cal. And I did get a sneak peek of that tool, so I'm sorry Mark isn't feeling well to present it today. It's pretty awesome, and I use that as in the most technical sense. In terms of being able to automate a lot of the checks that we do manually now, so faster publication for specifications. So are we skipping this section or? Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to kick us off. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming in. And I'm going to provide the eKYC and IDA updates. Mark is not with us, but he did attend OSW in Reykjavik. I know George Fletcher was there as well. I don't have any news from the front, but I heard it was an awesome forum and lots of good kind of deep discussions on the existing specifications and what's coming next. As far as the last deliverable since the last workshop in October 2024, OpenID Connect Authority 1.0 implementations continue to spread across the globe. There's several in Australia and UK, and I provided the links there for folks to check out on their own. I think Gail mentioned the FAPI submission, but ISO also went in for publicly available specification. It's out for ballot, and I think they're almost done with that 12-week period, so we should be hearing back from them soon. Yes. Okay, great. We have an ISO representative in the crowd. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, we've added a new working group call to the identity assurance, and that is 5:30 Japan Standard Time, so in Tokyo. And I believe that's on Wednesday or Thursday. The conformance testing suite is out of beta, so excited about that. And we continue to refresh the charter for the next phase of work to include age assurance, authority use cases, which are gaining traction really across the industry. And I'm seeing a lot more in the US, especially with some of the newer services that are rolling out for teens. I think there's a note in there about a white paper, but I can't really see it. Yeah. So that's an opportunity for us is to drive the specifications to final, drive the specifications to something that's usable for the implementer community.
So, sorry, the comment that's covered there was that
Yes.
several of the white papers we'll talk about today,
Yeah.
for the agentic AI, for
Yes.
the age assurance white paper, and the DADE white
Yep.
paper, all have delegate authority requirements, which are being synthesized through the work group.
Excellent. Thanks, Gil.
Hey, Nori.
Yes.
Can you get the microphone a little closer to your mouth and speak up?
Yeah.
Focus on the
Sure thing.
virtually.
Thanks, Mike. I noticed it was cutting out, so I'll keep it close. Interoperability conformance testing updates. As I mentioned, the testing suite is out of beta. The final test will become available for self-certification conformance soon. Gain POC helped prove out the specifications over the last couple of years. So shout out to all the folks who participated in that. As Gail mentioned, white papers, we're expecting in Q2, first half white paper recommendations supporting AI and identity communities to drive adoption. And then also AI identity communities consensus on requirements and approach to close spec gaps for delegated authority. As far as, I don't think there's any sessions this week at IIW, but in terms of the roadmap, in Q1 2025, we're expecting attachments to go to final. And then in Q2, the authority spec to go to ID2. As Gail mentioned, there's a lot of use cases globally for parental authority and other delegated authority use cases. So we're very excited about that. And I'm going to hand it off to Dean for the DADE group. Thanks, everyone.
All right, that came a little earlier than expected. Good afternoon. My name is Dean Sachs. I am one of the co-chairs for the Death in the Digital Estate Community Group, aka DADE. Let's see if this works. So we founded DADE last year in September 2024. It was chartered, and it was really created so that we had a space to develop an understanding of how individuals can manage their digital estate, whether it's because of temporary or permanent disablement or because they've passed away. The reality is this is something that's going to impact every single one of us in this room. We're all going to die. It's not a thing that we like to talk about necessarily, but it's a necessary thing to talk about. And our online presence and digital data is part of a digital estate that needs control. Like many of you, I've been online a long time. I've been online for more years than I'd like to count at this point, over 35. And so I have a lot of history online. There's writing, there's images, there's photographs, there's audio, video, code, and all of the data that is stored, digital data, digital artifacts stored in the cloud, stored locally, stored by me or on behalf of me, is part of my digital estate. And we simply don't have mechanisms to deal with this at scale globally. So we've been meeting as a community group regularly since Q4 of 2024. Eve Mailer and Mike Kaiser are my co-chairs. I couldn't do this without their help. And right now we've been working on a number of different items. First, developing the use cases to cover disablement and death. So what do these use cases look like? Use cases like, if I pass away, I want to be able to pass my domains to my spouse or my children, or I want to be able to have control over what happens to my blog or my photos or my images, such that they just don't disappear off the internet, for instance. Maybe I want them to persist for a period of time. But also, how do I want my images, my video, my audio to interact with agentic AI in the future, or AI in general in the future? Can it be remixed? Can it be reused in some way using my voice, using my likeness? We're also collecting some data on legacy contacts and similar mechanisms for consumer services. And if you've tried to do this yourself, you will know that it is highly, highly inconsistent what is available depending on the platform. Apple is different from Google, is different from Facebook, is different from LinkedIn. And so all of these services have different kinds of mechanisms to deal with legacy contacts or whatever they call their particular mechanism. There's no consistency here as to how you actually enable this and trigger this. And then we're documenting other resources that we discover. So we've been looking at news articles, podcasts, books, and other organizations that are operating in this space. I believe one of them is the Digital Legacy Association out of the UK. I recently ran across a company out of New York City that actually proposes that they will manage your digital estate for you through your legal contacts or whoever has written your will. But again, we still lack consistent sets of mechanisms. Now, we're also learning that this is a really uncomfortable topic, and I can see by looking at the room, all of you are quite uncomfortable. Okay, Dick says he's all good. I'm glad you're good, Dick. That was the most important thing of being here today, is that you're doing all right. So, but what we're realizing is that not only are these topics just uncomfortable in general, but for some people, due to culture, due to customs, beliefs, or even language, talking about death is not as simple as just saying the word out loud. There are some languages where the word or words that sound similar to death are actively avoided. And so we are struggling with this a little bit. We're aware of the challenge, and we're aware that we may inadvertently choose words or phrases or talk about things that cause discomfort for others. We'll always look for ways to do better and to minimize that, but we recognize that we simply can't avoid it. Soon, we will have a DADE panel at Identiverse 2025. Mike Kaiser and I are on the panel. Initially, Eve was going to join us. She had to step away. But we are actively looking for a lawyer or somebody who works in this space to join us on stage. Sociologist, thanatologist, which is a new term I learned recently, just someone who studies death and the sociological impacts of death and dying. So I'm actively soliciting some folks right now to join us on stage for that panel. But if you know of anybody, please let me know. I would love your help to get somebody there on stage with us at Identiverse. So upcoming, we have pitched a white paper called The State of Digital Estate Management. And it is not only a white paper, but it also includes a planning guide for how you can plan your own digital estate based upon the collected experience of members of DADE and the research that we've done. Heather Flanagan has agreed to be co-editor with me on this paper. And our goal is really to document the current state and influence the audience, which includes tech companies, tech leaders, politicians, standards developers, standards orgs, kind of like the one we're standing in right now, to influence them to prioritize development and deployment of controls that enable consumers to make active, consent-driven choices regarding how their digital estate is handled or managed. And this, again, not only includes death, but it also includes temporary and permanent disablement, which in many ways overlap this space. And in my mind, and this is thanks to some pushing by Gail, a lot of this looks kind of like what we see with power of attorney or digital healthcare, or sorry, not digital healthcare directive, a healthcare directive, which if you've gone through this process with your own lawyers, you'll know that you have these things so that you can consent to things ahead of time or say exactly what you want your wishes to be ahead of time, and somebody who can execute them on your behalf. And we don't have this in the digital realm today. And so that's something that we're kind of looking at as to maybe that's the direction collectively we need to go. So I mentioned that planning guide will help individuals plan their estate. And we hope to release this for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, because nobody needs another Cybersecurity Awareness Month where they're told to rotate their passwords, choose strong passwords, use passkeys, etc. Those things are great, but that message is tired at this point. We've all heard that message for years, and we actually need to hear different messages about what we can do to protect our digital selves. So I've already gone over the audience and the authors, but if your organization can help, join us at the working group. We have both a North American / EMEA call on Friday mornings. I believe it's 9 a.m. Friday mornings on the West Coast. And we alternate with an APAC North America call on Wednesday afternoons. I believe it's 3 p.m. in the afternoon on the West Coast on Wednesdays. So please, if you have any ability to help, or if you wish to join us, come join us at the working group calls. Or if you want to engage in the white paper, grab myself, grab Heather Flanagan. We're able to help you with that. And with that, yeah, okay, happy to do Q&A before we move on to AI white paper. And I guess I stay up here for that.
I have one question.
Any questions for Dean?
I have one right here.
Is it something as extension to the CRBS systems, like typical civil service, civil ministry kind of CRBS is one of the thing, right? So where they register the death and birth kind of thing, the first thing.
I'm not familiar with that actually. OpenCVS.
CRBS. Civil registry.
Okay, someone's gonna have to educate me. I don't even know that one.
Basically, I'm from Masir.
Okay.
So fine, we don't work. I mean, they actually approach us. CRBS is a typical thing, and OpenCVS is one of the open source kind of stuff.
Okay.
So, I mean, that is only for registering the birth and death, that kind of stuff. So I think I see here is probably, one more version of the will kind of thing, right? So if I'm correct.
Yeah.
That's correctly, but so the will can be before or after, right? So I don't want to take too much time here, but is that the model you are looking at?
Well, right now we're simply trying to collect an understanding of where the world is as we start to think about where we want the world to be in the future. But we do know there are obviously birth and death registries. We know about how some of them work. We know about how some of them have been hacked over the years. In fact, on a call on Friday, Lyndon Dawson, who's from National Bank of Australia, I believe, mentioned she had a recent customer who came in who said, "Hi, I'm here to tell you that I'm not dead." Because we know that these things fail too, and so we have to think of that. But I would love to chat with you maybe a little bit later today and get some information about the civil registry.
Basically, the foundation ID, so it actually has that kind of rules. So right up, I mean, I'll see if someone can contribute from outside. We'll see.
That would be great. Thank you very much for your help. Who else? I think George had a question.
Please speak clearly and loud into the microphone so those online can hear.
Sure.
So I just think this is really interesting, right? If we enable a birth and death registry that everybody checks before we figure out the other stuff, we're actually gonna cause more harm than good, because many things, it's really convenient to be able to impersonate the the subject, thank you. The person who's deceased or incapacitated, and get stuff done because the site doesn't know that they're deceased. I mean, I can't tell you how much mail I get, addressed to my wife, who did pass away a year and a half ago. And, but it's also very convenient if I need to log into some site, right, that they don't know. And what would happen if they did. So anyway, it's a really interesting problem space, I think, that we're in as we sort of work through these and figure out what is the right thing we want in the digital space? What are the capabilities that need to be there to sort of enable all of the functionality that we want?
Yeah, and George, what you're talking about, even though it sounds like an anti-pattern, people should know and be able to do something with digital assets when somebody has passed away. The fact that they don't is actually been a good thing for you to be able to take control over those things. So we see some things that, though they may look like anti-patterns today, may actually be suitable for the humans today until we get to a better state. But we've got to, as Gail would say, cross that chasm and get to that better state. Any other questions?
Not the question, but the microphone.
Can you hear us?
Yes, better. Thank
Okay.
you.
So the participants here should have the microphone very close to your mouth. That's the.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have one more quick question, sorry.
Go ahead.
You were trying to do a global, trying to solve for the problem for the global or a specific geographic location?
Oh, fantastic question. So the question being global or the specific location, ideally global, right? We recognize that around the world, there are different mechanisms for tracking births and deaths and all of the things that happen regarding that. So, global is the goal, but we recognize that it's going to take work at a much more local level to actually happen. Last week had a great conversation with the group down in Australia from OpenID Foundation, who's actually starting up a group to focus on DAID in Australia. And so look forward to speaking with Dima more this week and getting information on what's happening there. So hopefully we'll see smaller pockets of DAID groups pop up in different places that can focus on the local environment.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is MOSIP is spread across a lot of countries in African segment. So I'm from India, so MOSIP is from India. So I just want to make sure that we can contribute to this thing so that we actually get more mileage on this thing.
Absolutely, would love the help from MOSIP. You have context that we don't have. And so it'd be great to be able to pick your brain and the brains of people associated with MOSIP to understand what's happening in India and Africa and other places where MOSIP is very active. Thanks. Any other questions online? See any? All right. Thank you all very much for your time.
Okay. How is it?
I never use this around here.
Well, you don't want the high chair? Very fun. You have great thoughts. I read your blog very quickly. You have great thoughts to share. Hopefully this hopefully this session doesn't include too much discussion of death, but if we want to take it there, we can. Cool. The more the merrier. Brief introduction from me, and then I will very quickly introduce, and then we'll move to the panel. I'm Tobin. I do research between MIT and Stanford. I will out myself as more of an AI person than an authentication person here. Don't hold that against me. But I'm kind of here to talk to all of you because there is absolute pandemonium in the AI community right now, where people building chatbots have discovered those chatbots can do things they can connect to APIs, they can take actions, and they've decided to do that without any authentication, which is broadly concerning. And very quickly, startups, AI companies are realizing they need more robust authorization and authentication in order to actually do anything with AI. They are, however, just reinventing the wheel. I was just chatting with a YC company yesterday who's decided they think they should just reinvent the authentication stack for the AI world, which doesn't seem like a great path forward. And what could possibly go wrong? And so we want to bring this conversation to this community to think about how can we do this properly? How can we communicate that to AI practitioners? How can we get some kind of consensus around what is the right way to do this? To very briefly motivate why I think this is different from other conversations and traditional API usage and systems that can act autonomously. Agents have a very large action space. They can use a browser, they can make phone calls, they can call APIs, they can chat in natural language. This creates a unique set of problems around if your software can take any action, how do you restrict those actions? How do you do so dynamically? How do you make sure there's a human in the loop and what that means for liability? I think there are a huge number of questions that are made significantly worse by the AI use cases. And so I think that's something we need to have as a conversation. And I guess the key thing is the OpenID Foundation is well positioned to have a strong and opinionated stance that can help the AI community not reinvent the wheel, as they like to do. And lots of useful venues to communicate this to audiences that need to hear it. I can say from an AI community perspective, they need to hear some kind of voice, some kind of solution. They're very scared. I get LinkedIn messages requesting GitHub repos. That should be a red flag at all times if that's the level of desperation you're getting to. So in general, I think it's more fun to have a discussion. So Aaron, to kick us off, can you summarize the blog you wrote on Friday about this topic?
Yeah, I spent last week spinning up on this after being out of mostly offline for the last 3 weeks, so that was fun. But I came back to a series of frantic messages across many communication platforms, being like, hey, so there's this MCP server thing, and they just launched this new protocol and described how to use OAuth. And I think, oh, that's very cool. Like, I'm glad to see people actually saying like, oh, there's OAuth, let's apply this, which is better than a lot of other efforts I've done. So at least there was that. There were some interesting assumptions and applications in it that I was questioning as I was reading through things. So it was a combination of me trying to learn very quickly what the community is coming at this with in terms of their assumptions and their expected architectures, and I'm trying to understand that perspective. And then the blog post I wrote was basically like, how can you apply OAuth to this in a way that is actually like more OAuth centric and more using existing building blocks and things. So the short version of the situation is, I think there's a lot of excitement in the industry, and there's a lot of people who think this is entirely new stuff that has never possibly existed before, and there's nothing relevant to it because it's so new. And in reality, like, actually there's a lot of the existing API access patterns and authorization patterns, delegation patterns apply one-to-one to this space. So it's just a matter of like finding the mappings and finding how do you apply the thing about the MIDC world to this slightly new application of it. And yes, there are some unanswered questions in the space, but like you need to kind of figure out. I was trying to push the discussion in the direction of like, let's figure out exactly where the very small gaps are that are like the missing pieces, but like most of this is actually just mostly an OAuth problem. And yeah, so the blog post it ended up way longer than I thought it was going to be. It was like
good,
very, very long, but I've got a lot of good feedback on it already.
And to contextualize that, MCP, Model Context Protocol, is essentially a wrapping around APIs to surface them more usefully to AI systems. That Anthropic released recently. They did a big 1.0 launch, and it took the AI community by storm. OpenAI now supports it. all the startups are supporting as a kind of unified standard around AI access to tools. And the V1 had no authentication, for what it's worth, just to context set how bad this is.
Yeah, and like it's surprising to see anybody decide on a standard API format at all, which is kind of impressive. So like that's cool. But they we need to like tease apart some of their architectural assumptions and make it fit with OAuth a little better.
Totally. And to add more to that, we recently ran a workshop at Stanford in collaboration with Consumer Reports around what authenticated delegation looks like, delegated authority looks like for agents. And there was pushback in both directions from consumer and enterprise use cases. OpenAI made a comment that consumers don't care and they just want to say to the robot, do the thing, and then the robot goes and does the thing. And that is the perspective of some in the AI community. There is also people who are very worried about the actions that can be taken by AI and want to severely restrict scope to these highly autonomous systems. And I think we need to factor in the role of the human in the loop and how OpenID style tools can help with this. Hit us.
For me, one of the big questions in that space is really the liability side of it. Who's taking on risk in this scenario, and are the people who are taking on risk even aware that they're, it's not a human they're interacting with an agent. So I think in many of these cases, yes, humans don't want to be, challenged, every time the agent tries to do something in one context. There probably are things we could learn from user managed access and some of those things about how you can sort of pre-authorize. I thought your points earlier about not sort of just generically saying the agent can do anything as me is probably, also really important. So where is that balance? But the bigger issue is that sort of liability piece of it, and how does that apply? And if more user consent pushes liability then kind of on the user, right? But creates a less than desirable user experience. So I think there's probably a lot of exploratory work to do there.
George, I think last week we were on an email thread about this, getting ready for this. And one of the things that came up was, what if I have an agent that can help me research buying a thing, let's call it a dishwasher. And I want to go buy a dishwasher. I use an agent to help me figure out which one to buy. And then I use that agent to figure out, well, which one can get it to me under the constraints of time, cost, delivery fees, etc., so that the agent can do all the work for me and actually go and pay for the transaction. And I think this question of delegation is really important, because how much do I want to delegate to the agent with that credit card number, for instance, right? Does it have free range and can go spend money on my credit card anytime it wants? Is it limited to certain scenarios that I pre-authorize? Is there a limit based on a dollar amount? And these are the kinds of complex authorization questions that I don't think we yet have answers to. And I will point out, Tobin, you mentioned, the early days of MCP as of 6 months ago.
Less.
There was no authentication. One of the earliest uses I saw of MCP was someone saying, okay, so go log into the service with your browser and then copy the session cookies from your browser to the MCP agent and let it just operate as you. And I'm glad we're moving away from that pattern. That's clearly an anti-pattern. But I'm not yet convinced we understand what patterns we need today. We're getting, and it will come with time, but there's a lot of work to happen still.
Do any of you have thoughts on the role of delegated authority, the various other work groups on this? Otherwise, answer what you're going to say.
Yeah, I mean, this is working. Yeah. I was only going to add, about the differences between an AI use case and a normal use case which doesn't involve intelligent agents, right? So obviously we want to try and detect whether something is an agent or not, but I think that's going to be harder and harder as we go. So I don't think we should, try to do that too much. But I think a couple of things that come to mind is that sort of the unanticipated behavior, right? So the real world example that George and I discussed the other day was, let's say I want to authorize my kid to drive my car to Costco and pick up something for me. And what if the kid decides that, oh, the car is out of gas and I need to fill it. Right? That's the kind of unanticipated behavior that, how are you going to capture that in authorization? So I think rather than sort of in the OAuth world where we are used to defining scopes in a very precise kind of way, could we capture the intent in a more sort of expressive way and have the cloud be intelligent enough to understand what that entails, right? I mean, is that a way to go? The
Yeah.
other thing is about, are we training the agent by saying no or yes to the agent, right? So when we give an authorization decision, is the agent going to then change their behavior in order to do something differently, right? And how do we control that, or how do we guide about that? I think those are the couple of things that come to mind, which
I want to just call out something you said of OAuth scopes are like maybe not quite right. The fact that you're even like saying that is a great example of like that exists and that it might need some changes. But when a lot of the community talks about this, they're just like, let's just make this up from scratch and just like do everything new and make up a vocabulary and like not even considering that there might be something that exists that's almost right, but maybe needs some slight modification, right? So that's the kind of thinking that I think we need to do more of, is like, let's do more advocacy of like, there's a lot of existing infrastructure that is a good starting point, and yes, there are unsolved problems that are related, like specific to the agent use case, but it's not all new stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, let me add to that. A lot of the AI community views this as an alignment problem. How do you make sure the AI model doesn't misbehave? You told it to do a thing, it doesn't do different things it shouldn't. They're essentially reinventing the idea of scopes in an extremely fuzzy and unreliable way, and bringing some of that, even if it is scopes in natural language that are then interpreted behind the scenes, which might be, not to scare anyone, like maybe a question we ask, I think there are good lessons to be learned.
I was just gonna sort of address your point about sort of delegated authorization in, the Kantara initiative has some work going on specifically in the space that was new to me, showed up in a comment on one of my LinkedIn posts. And of course, the work that I had already mentioned earlier, both are sort of trying to begin to capture some of the sort of relationships from a delegation and authorization perspective. I still think there's probably a lot of work to do, and the different kinds of use cases may need different kinds of forms. I don't know that we will get to like one JSON structure that represents it perfectly. But I do think more needs to be done, and it would be great if other people know of other places where this kind of work is happening, natural language or otherwise, and how we can sort of make sure that we're helping each other, and not creating conflicting solutions.
Yeah, and there's a Stanford workshop tomorrow on liability and risk for AI agents. So lots of these questions are coming up, lots of communities thinking about it. I think it's time for questions, right?
Yeah, we have a question online, Tobin.
Brian.
From Julie Mass first.
Julie, sorry.
Has there been discussion about whether an organization and or a human should be taking responsibility for the actions of the agent, considering any specific actions separately for the moment? That seems like an additional prerequisite to build on.
I think there are like really rich liability questions. I think at the end of the day, people like to fire people. You need someone to be responsible. That's my take, and lots of people are working on it.
So I have a slightly different answer, maybe not exactly the answer to this, but when an AI agent is being used in the context of an enterprise company, there's a lot of very different assumptions around liability and consent around who gets to decide whether it's okay, who gets to decide scope of access. And as another thing I'm particularly interested in solving, I've been working on this in a non-AI agent use case, but the same questions all apply here. So I teased this at the very bottom of the blog post, but it was like, it's a whole new topic to get into, and I didn't want to overwhelm people with an already very long post. But I have a lot of building blocks that are already been lining up to solve it in the enterprise use case.
I think my perspective is that, before we get to the question of liability, I think what is a good model to do authorization and access management in AI, right? I think OAuth is a good starting point, but it may not actually solve all our problems, right? Because I think OAuth is dependent somehow on obtaining consent from a user about, what is it exactly that they're permitting the agent to do?
Hmm.
And I don't know if that model is going to work in the future, right? Because the agents are going to be very dynamic in what they are deciding to do, right? So how do you now then get the consent or implicit consent from the user for all those actions? I think once we have a better understanding of those mechanisms, it might be easier to nail down the liability, because maybe the user agrees to a plan that, hey, I agree to this plan, and now the liability is on the user, right? So something.
Yeah, I think similar to what Atul is saying, we've also got to look at, what else is up and coming in this space. I think looking at the work happening in the Whimsy working group around workload identity is going to be really important here, because agents are effectively workloads. Now they're operating hopefully on behalf of us, but how do we express that clearly and consistently across maybe a very, very deep call stack, right? And so how do we ensure that authorization is appropriate for this agent at this time based upon the particular call that is being made? The original call is being made. How do we do this in a way that respects time too? Because it may be that some of these questions or some of these authorizations happen at time 0, and 24, 48 hours later, a year later is when it actually gets executed. So how do we wrap that component of timeliness around the authorization story that we're asking here? And I just don't think we fully have answers to this yet. We're getting there, and I'm happy to see the work happening. But it's still going to take us some time to figure these things out. And I think the more that we work at this, the more we're going to learn about what we don't yet know or don't yet have solutions to.
Yeah, I love that.
Jackie, and then Brian Campbell. This is Hideki from NRA from Japan. And so the good news recently about the MCP, so AI, is that the latest version of the MCP publishing on 27th of March, so just like a weeks ago, has stated that OS 2.1 draft should be used as the for authorizations. That's the good news. And the bad news is from like Japan-specific. So there were some mistranslation that of the authorization translated as authentication in Japanese, and yeah,
Did you get an AI to do the translation?
That's the problem. Yeah, well, I think it's AI's responsibility. We should put the responsibility on AI for mistranslation. So, but still, like the authentication of the whether the user has the right to do that, or the AI agent or the MCP client, MCP server is legit or not, should be like not only the authorization aspect, the authentication aspect should be considered. That's my comment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Can we get Brian online?
Hi, Brian online.
Sorry, Brian, we can't hear you very well.
That's probably because every time I talk, I get echoing, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah, Brian, you sound a bit like an AI. Can you type out the question so we can read it? We can't quite hear you, which might be our fault. I'll note on the MCP thing that, yes, there has been a proposal. It's not necessarily agreed upon that is the right choice by everyone. They might push it through. But I think this is also very heterogeneous across use cases, whether it is kind of a long-term workload with a really deep call stack, or whether it's a consumer application, whether it's in an enterprise use case. I think there are nuanced choices that matter across them.
I will say, though, that one thing I really liked about Aaron's blog is that it set up the sort of basics for how you can integrate OAuth 2.1 in the sort of core OAuth mechanisms in this space. And then you can start layering on a lot of the other things. So if we need stuff like RAR, adding it is relatively straightforward, right? If there isn't enough nuance in the sort of default OAuth case, right? Because the default OAuth case is I'm giving the agent access to my resources for, some specific set of functions or capabilities or scopes, or, choose your word. There are lots of other kinds of delegated authorizations that need to happen. In the, I'm sure in the AI space as well as in, real life. But it becomes much easier to layer those things on because we have other things that can help in that space. So, I think the more we can help the community understand that, hey, basing this off of OAuth 2.1 doesn't mean it's going to solve every problem that you have right now, but you have the sort of a good framework or foundation where it's going to be much easier to solve the things you want to solve as opposed to going off and starting over.
Absolutely.
That is going to open a can of worms for Microsoft.
We need to get that started.
What I'm saying is that is going to open the can of worms for consent management. Because somebody likes to say that, okay, I'm going to override the instruction, whatever, getting, there may be one use case, right? I want to override my instruction. So who is going to override it? How long is it going to override it? How I can revoke that instruction? It's going to open can of worms.
Revocation case is actually really, really interesting because when we going back to death and digital estate, when we think about you got an agent out there doing things on your behalf and you've passed away, how does that agent get that message? How does that agent shut down gracefully? How do we prevent that agent from representing you as a live person after you've died? Right? These are real questions.
Yeah, you are big time on that.
I bring the darkness, sorry.
Brian, let's see if we can get you one last chance.
Gail has a question.
Oh,
Brian first.
Campbell, go ahead.
We scroll up. No question.
Do we have?
Yeah, he said that.
Here it is.
Down?
The second to last one. Oh, sorry. That's Thomas. I thought it was Brian.
No, he's joined from a different computer, so there's two Brians. Maybe he can.
Brian, can you go off mute and try again?
Here we go. Disservice. I think we are doing a disservice to everyone by focusing questions on if OAuth scope is sufficient for the AI agent's liability, multi-person /thing/workload delegation temporarily of consent. Sorry.
I think that's exactly right. So I think we might be trying to fit everything to the thing that we know and may not be the right.
I do want to clarify. I'm not trying to say that OAuth has the answers and that everything should fit that model, but I don't know how much everybody else is right about the architecture they propose. My whole goal here is more like what George said of, let's make sure that the discussions are happening with the building blocks that OAuth has set up, so that when there are these questions of, is scope correct? People are asking the question, is scope correct? Rather than, let's reinvent the entire world of authorization. So like, once you set up the model of like, okay, there's a resource over here, there's an authorization server here, here's the responsibilities of each, then we can question whether those responsibilities are enough, or if we need to define more things that kind of extend that. But it just helps us have a better shared foundation of the space.
Aaron, I think you're absolutely correct in that, but one of the questions I have, and maybe Tobin, is who's defining this specification, right? I think it's a corporate driven,
Yeah,
so it's kind of de facto. It's
yeah.
not driven by, the community, right?
It's some combination of the large AI labs and the wild west of chaos defining.
It's not a standards organization, but
Yes.
but also like most of the protocol is an API syntax. They just have this section about like, how do you authorize it? And like, that's where I was trying to bring in like, let's apply OAuth into this, right?
I think also there are many sort of delegated authorization patterns that we, sort of have been worked with in the community over time that again, sort of layer on top of OAuth. So I think that there's work, a lot of work that's been done. And yes, I agree with Brian, like scopes themselves are not going to solve this problem, but the underlying sort of core elements, like Aaron was saying, I think can move us in the right direction. We can have the conversations around, how might you better represent that? Could you represent the things the agent wants to do, you know, via RAR as an example, right? And I think that the user managed access basically allowed for pre-authorization, right? And that was one of its core capabilities. So if you think about this in the context of the agent makes a request to the authorization server and it has this concept of pre-authorization, then it can potentially get a token with this still narrowly scoped without the user being, you know, challenged or bugged or annoyed or whatever. So there's a lot of things that we've done in the industry that are super applicable. And I think the bigger thing for me is how do we get engaged in that conversation?
Yep.
And how do we get recognized as having a viable voice from an authentication and authorization and identity perspective in that space?
So I actually have a almost an answer to that. So one of the folks behind this, I saw some comments. So somebody else wrote a blog post that published on Thursday that was, the title was like, OAuth and MCP is broken. Here's how we're gonna like solve everything. And it was a very attacking the protocol. And it was just like not a constructive tone. And one of the people who wrote the MCP spec was justifiably kind of annoyed about seeing that blog post. Like, well, why didn't you like tell us instead of like throwing a big fit online about it, right? And I also get the sense that they are looking for advice from the OAuth and OpenID community. They just don't necessarily know where to go to find it. So like, we need to make it like, to be fair, like if you go to the OpenID website, it's not immediately clear, like, how would you ask somebody a question about one of the specs? Like, there's some calls to actions of like, join the working group, but that's not what they want to do. So like, there's not a clear path, right? So like, that's some of the stuff that we can try to fix.
And I guess to zoom out as part of this whole initiative is, we're talking about MCP, and this might be the thing in 6 months. It might completely change, like the AI world moves fast. But I feel like it'd be good to put a voice out there, and which is why we're pitching the white paper as an opportunity for all of you to spam email all of us with all of your thoughts, and then we collate them and convey that to the AI community. Did you have a comment?
I mean, my only point was that, you know, if we look at the OAuth model, it assumes a certain level of capability among, you know, from the agent or client or whoever is requesting that. It also assumes something about the resource or about, you know, how it can be authorized and all those things. A lot of those assumptions are going to have to change for AI. And I think we should take cognizance of that when we come up with a new model.
Just a couple, I guess, 3 key points. One, to key off of what Tobin was just saying on the white paper. The board members in the room would know that we're going to have a resolution this afternoon requesting approval for the white paper under Tobin's lead editorship. And we have several board members and experts in the committee also already going to be part of an oversight committee for the paper to really ensure that we have a single voice across the OpenID Foundation and any other partner organizations that we bring in. Right, so if Stanford and MIT are willing to co-brand, we'll do that. If Consumer Reports wants to co-brand or comment, we'll do that. And we have other kind of expert organizations we think we'll engage with and use the oversight committee to make sure that we're really approaching the paper process as a way to bring everybody along with us, including the AI community themselves, right? So we're really trying to be pragmatic with the paper and ideally do things sooner rather than later, right? To then like get the first draft down so people can react to it as kind of critical path. Second, having been in the room for the event that Tobin coordinated, and I was delighted to get a last minute invitation, even though you all know I would be the worst technical person in the room, but at least I could kind of see what was going on. And it was telling that a lot of the leading AI organizations had their lawyers in the room and compliance people in the room, not their product people. It was the smaller companies who had their product or CEO level people in the room, right? So one of the angles of actually getting stuff done is that this is a legal risk and compliance issue for these large companies that are otherwise incentivized to create the ring fences in the walls and the exclusive, you know, APIs that are really only useful to themselves. So we have to kind of overcome some of those dynamics because regulation is unlikely to move fast enough to change the game in the short term for all the problems that we anticipate that are out there. We also mentioned that these white papers, we intend to have them connected to each other. So the DADE white paper is linking back to the agentic AI paper, is linking to the age authorization paper, so that they have some common themes in the way that we are engaging with each of those siloed communities. Last is that there were a couple of use cases that came up during the course of the conversation at Stanford, and one of those was open banking. So there were examples that Tobin had given, and we discussed in the room of not just cookie stealing, but also straight old screen scraping. That is, you know, terrible. And one of the suggestions that was given was to kind of reinvent cookies, and that would be the way to solve things, which again is like, please no. That's a lot of lessons learned. So on the open banking side, we know in the US and then in many other jurisdictions, there's a playbook for how consumers can request information. So a fintech can do something on their behalf, or an agent can do something on their behalf. So that's a use case that we as a community know very well, and which the banks in the US are in an arms race to create agents, you know, that are going to solve these problems. So we can help get the right information and connect the dots for them. Another key use case is digital identity credentials. So the use of digital identity credentials is another way to inform this unauthorized consent.
Random extra note, in case people are thinking, oh, banks would never, financial institutions would never connect themselves to AI. There was a release from PayPal on Friday connecting the PayPal services to AI, you know, agents. So like this is coming scarily fast. Cool. Any other takers, or are we good on time? Great.
So please find Tobin. He's around this week at IIW as well, I think. So,
Yep, we'll hopefully do a workshop and it'll be fun.
and thanks to the panelists.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Okay.
I did.
Oh, you did? Oh, it was-
We'll see. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Jones. It's good to see all of you. And I have the pleasure to talk with you about things that have been going on in the OpenID Connect working group since we last met our heroes 6 months ago. There's been a lot going on. So one of the things was we did the security analysis for OpenID Federation. Thank you to the foundation for doing that, as we've done with other protocols productively. And this was particularly productive because they found a bug, a security hole. And it not only applied to OpenID Federation, but a lot of other things. And I'll have a slide about that by itself. The certification team has been developing certification tests for OpenID Federation, and people are starting to run those. There's an interop event for Federation, which will occur in Sweden, thanks to the goodness of SUNet, who's hosting us in Stockholm at the end of the month. There have been 3 specs, count them, 3, that have been adopted in the last 6 months. One of them was the OpenID Federation wallet architectures draft. That had been in discussion 6 months ago, but we got a version that there was consensus to adopt after our last meeting. The OpenID Connect RP metadata choices spec was adopted, and the OpenID provider commands spec was adopted, which Dick will talk about when I leave the stage. So it's not just one slide, there's 2. The Federation security analysis by the people at University of Stuttgart found a bug in or an ambiguity in our audience values as sent to the authorization server, AKA the identity provider or the OP. We discussed this in private for months and talked to communities that had deployments that were vulnerable to the bug, and they fixed them. We also talked at IETF in Dublin, again privately, not wanting to prematurely disclose a vulnerability, about what should we do because it affected OAuth, and came to some conclusions. We vetted them with the OAuth working group. We vetted them with Connect working groups. So we're well on our way. As a result, OpenID Federation was fixed. There's a draft errata for OpenID Connect Core that's published. FAPI 2 was fixed before it became final. There's a draft errata for FAPI 1, fixing it, that's published. There's a draft errata for SIBA Core, which fixes it, all published. And there's a number of OAuth specs that are being implemented where the actual core problem was by a draft that we got adopted called 7523 BIS, which Brian and I are in the process of updating to reflect some consensus decisions in Thailand at the last ITF meeting. So again, read the disclosure thing if you really want to understand it, but the fix is to require that the audience in JOTS sent to the authorization server, particularly for the private key JOT client authentication, to contain only the authorization server issuer identifier. And by comparison, let me see if I can get that off this, or who's driving the projector? Can we get the chat off the slides? Thank you. These pesky Macs. My mic is muted. If you look at the text at the bottom of the screen, this is something that Joseph Heenan pulled out of the PAR spec for an OAuth presentation, but it demonstrates kind of the ambiguities we created for ourselves. There were 3 different kinds of audiences that were supposed to be accepted, and one that must be accepted. And it turns out that that was enough ambiguity for clever attackers to drive a truck through. So we're undoing that. Now the slides aren't advancing.
On that slide, I think you just click the screen.
Okay. I think you just went 2 slides forward. Oh, there we go. Yes, it's working again. Thank you, Gail. So as I mentioned, there is a Federation Interop event being planned. There's a blog post about that. There's about 25 participants we know of. There's about a dozen implementations that are participating. We will test the tests for the certification tests that have been written, and Marcus Almgren plans to create some more before we get there. So he's busy coding away. Thank you, Marcus. We'll test implementations with each other, and we'll test them against various topologies, including those with multiple trust anchors. OpenID Connect Core, which has been stable for a dozen years. Nonetheless, we're going to do an errata that changes the way private key JOT works because of the security hole that was found during the Federation analysis, and that draft is published. The OpenID Connect for native SSO spec, George Fletcher, who's in the room, is planning updates to remove the use of the ID token. Talk to George if you want to be part of that discussion. The OpenID Federation extended subordinate listing spec makes certain kinds of queries much more scalable that are motivated, among others, by some open finance use cases in Australia. And some of the folks from Radium are authors of that. It's good to have new authors. The Federation Wallet Architecture spec has Giuseppe as a new author. And it defines entity types for trust establishment when using OpenID Federation with wallet ecosystems. I created, based on multiple people's independently coming up with this need, a spec called RP Metadata Choices, which allows RPs to express a set of supported values for some RP metadata parameters rather than just single values. And there's been some updates to that based on feedback. My question really to the Connect working group, but it's good to have these forcing functions is it time to do a review for an implementer's draft of that? I think yes. The OP commands draft, Dick will talk about. So some of you who were in the DCP meeting just prior heard me verbally say essentially this, that the working group's plan for OpenID Federation at this point is to learn what we're going to learn from the interop event at the end of the month, learn what we're going to learn from people testing the certification tests, feed that back as clarifications into the spec text, hopefully with no breaking changes, and progress it to be a final specification. Now, in a way, I don't like doing this slide, but I think it's important. We have 3 specs that were adopted, which have been dormant. The OpenID Connect claims aggregation, the user info verifiable credentials, and the self-issued OpenID provider V2. You can see when they were last touched. Now, I know Nat had said when I used a version of this slide 6 months ago that he had private changes to update the claims aggregation. I don't think it's happened. And nobody's said they're working on the other 2. So again, we're not going to decide this here, but it's a question that I should bring up in the working group. Okay, you're getting a bonus update on a near dormant working group. That the EAP working group, Enhanced Authentication Profile, has 2 specs, one of which we have officially abandoned because it's about token binding, which the world abandoned. But the other was the OpenID Connect EAP ACR values spec, which we recently did mostly editorial updates. Believe it or not, I wrote 2 SAML XSD files a few weeks ago, which I thought I would never do again, so that we could register these ACR values for phishing-resistant authentication and phishing-resistant hardware-backed authentication, which were defined in the OpenID 2 days. They predate Connect, but get them registered in the official registries. The working group last call for those updates ends tomorrow. After that, we will publish a slightly updated draft. Andre contributed to some updates, and I just put them in the acknowledgements today. And then we can close the working group. So I always like these conversations to be bi-directional. What would any of you like the OpenID Connect working group to know at this juncture? Yes, give the man a mic.
A bit of feedback in the handling of the vulnerability that was discovered. Just a kudos to the group for keeping it quiet, disclosing responsibly, not creating a panic or a rush to the exit, so to speak. So just hats off.
Well, thank you very much. Indeed, we tried to quietly notify everybody that we knew of that was probably affected in practice before we said a word in public.
Oh, were there any stragglers?
No, I am not aware of any stragglers. But, part of our call to action when we talked to OAuth in January publicly was if you know of anybody that you think needs to know that, please go tell them now.
The only thing that we as the foundation could do was reach out to those ecosystems, public or private, that we knew and had a relationship with. Right, so that's one of the things we reinforce when we talk to prospective ecosystems, that we really value having this direct conversation and connection. And we think they should too. In the event that situations like this arise, it's better to be able to be direct as well as quiet.
Yep. Thank you very much. Anybody else?
So this is more of a question than a comment.
And introduce yourself, please.
I'm Frederick from Christian.
Okay.
So in the BCI spec, which I know you're not affiliated with necessarily, but there is this notion.
Not as a working group, but personally, yes.
There is a notion of the deferred credential response. We have several use cases that we could also use something like this for OpenID Connect. Are there any? Has anyone else ever asked about this? And otherwise, we're probably going to do a session at IIW.
Do the IIW session and don't do it in the second slot tomorrow because otherwise I can't come and I want to come.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Dirk, do you want to talk? You're just stretching your legs.
He's helping.
Okay, thank you for helping, Dirk. Okay, with that, I will turn the microphone and the clicker over to Dick Hart.
Good afternoon, everybody. It feels very anticlimactic to give a presentation after the AI panel. Seems like everything else is going to be like very, very boring. I'm moving very fast.
Looks okay.
Maybe. So myself and Carl McGinnis, who used to be the chief product architect at Okta, and I have been talking about things like this for a while. I talked to a bunch of people at the IETF in Dublin, and we pulled together a draft that just recently got adopted. Links to the mail list and it's just the spec, the Connect mail list, and where the drafts are here. So it's a super simple idea. The OP sends a command to the RP. The command is a token, JWT token, that's been signed by the OP. The RP can verify that it's the OP that sent it by verifying the signature the same way it verifies any ID token. And then the RP sends a response about, what did it do with respect to that command? Here's an example of what a payload looks like, right? So the issuer would be the same as in an ID token, the sub the same, the audience is the client ID, when it was issued at, expiry, JTI, and then a new claim, which is what is the command. I'll go more into detail about the authorized command later. On Nat Sakamoto's advice, we were starting off with the unauthorized, and we thought, well, we can start to do some provisioning, deprovisioning, and he suggested, why don't we follow the whole ISO lifecycle that's already defined, what are account lifecycles? And so OP command supports all the different commands you could have in the defined lifecycle from ISO. So you can activate an account, maintain an account, suspend an account, archive an account, reactivate an account, restore account, and delete an account. So those are some of the commands. So here's a list of all the account commands which operate on a specific account. And then we have a concept of commands that are at a tenant level. And so a number of OPs represent more than one tenant. And so there hasn't been a defined way of representing a tenant in ID tokens. Google uses HD for the hosted domain as a indicator of the tenant. Microsoft uses TID as an indicator of the tenant. And we thought tenants are important, that we shouldn't just slough on that and let people make up yet another thing. If we want to make it easy for interop, we should define a tenant concept and a number. Is this still working? Okay. A number of commands are at the tenant level. So one of them is one of the first commands to happen would be a metadata command where the OP can say, hey, here's stuff about how I want to work with you, and that would be which tenant it's talking about. And the RP would be able to say, here's the commands I support for that particular tenant. And so this is envisioned to be in B2B SaaS as being one of the areas. And so different tenants, the RP might support different commands for different tenants for commercial reasons, right? That tenant is paid for certain kinds of functionality, and other tenants have less functionality or more. And then to enable, since you're looking to essentially manage what are all the accounts from the OP, one of the things is like, well, what does the RP have for this tenant? And so we had audit tenant, and since we had an audit tenant, we thought, well, why don't we just have a suspend and an archive and delete tenant, which enables you to essentially do those commands on all the accounts for a given tenant. And if that wasn't sort of a controversial enough thing, the other part was having looked at sending back long responses has been a challenge. So in an audit command where you're looking to go and get the status of all the accounts, as the size, the number of accounts grows, you start to have connection issues. What do you do if the connection drops? And so we proposed using server sent events to see whether that would work. As it turns out, I started to do a prototype with how OP commands works, and found that SSE is heavily used. I mean, it's a core part of the protocol in MCP. And so all the libraries for client side have been getting tons of use recently. So the one I was looking at, a node, had 6 million daily or weekly downloads. So fortunately, those guys are making sure that works, and we're not having to do necessarily all the lift on that. So the unauthorized event, which was sort of one of the motivators for doing something here, is some security incidents happened at the OP, and the OP wants to go and the user is logged into a bunch of RPs, and the OP wants to go and say, hey, that might not have been the right user, or the device might have been compromised or something. I want you to unauthorize all the things. And it's close to the OpenID backchannel logout, but that was designed for logout, and so it explicitly says not to change offline access. But if you had a compromise, you actually want to like unauthorize everything. And so that's one of the commands in OP commands. So OP commands versus SSF and SCIM. So traditionally shared signals has been around sending a signal, where in commands it's like, I want you to do this, and then the RP responds back and says whether it did it, whether it failed, whether, like, for example, one of the responses is that if you want to change the state of the account, but it's not in a state that makes sense for that. So say the account's suspended and you want to maintain it, right? Well, that would fail because you can't maintain a suspended account. And so if you get, the right kinds of errors coming back from the RP. And another difference is that OP commands is really, the OP just telling the RP, where shared signals is tended to be back and forth between well, it's just different parties sharing things back and forth. And then for SCIM, every time that goes beep, I think something's happening. I should do something. We really wanted to lower the barrier for B2B SaaS to support lifecycle, and SCIM's a big lift for organizations, because not only do you need SCIM, but then you need to put in an authorization server to manage the tokens that are used to make the the calls to the SCIM API. And the schema in SCIM is a little different than OpenID. And so by building upon the ID token and the scheme in the ID token, we hope that OP commands provides a much simpler path for a SaaS app to be able to go and offer lifecycle management, for the basic things of provisioning, deprovisioning, suspending an account. Any questions? No? Where's Omri? Is he remote?
Omri's remote. Does no one really have a question for Dick? That's fine.
Come on, Dean, give me an easy question.
Come on, Dean.
Got nothing for you, Dick. I'm sorry.
What do you think the open issues are?
We have a question from the room, which is what are the, I'll give it to Mike.
What do you think the issues are, given it's a new draft that need to be discussed and worked on?
Well, we had a queue of those set up for the last OpenID Connect call. There's a number of what I consider sort of miscellaneous changes of rephrasing. So in the original draft, the URL is called the commands URI. So changing that, suggesting changing that name to command endpoint to align more with the naming in OAuth. There's a bunch of little miscellaneous things. When I did an implementation, there's a number of things like, oh, there's not a way to say that there was an error here, so we should have an error event. A number of like small things. And there's a couple of other areas that probably have some discussion on the list. We talked about what can we do to make sure that a command token isn't misinterpreted as a ID token. And so one of the suggestions is, why don't we turn add the client ID as a separate claim that is the client ID, and have the audience be the command URI, so that they're clearly not going to be the same. They can't be confused. So that's, yeah. Yeah.
Being on the agenda and not making discussion last time.
Yeah.
On the next Portugal friendly call, we will put you on the agenda.
Oh, I'm West Coast for a few months now.
Oh, you are, well, you could do it Monday, not this week.
Okay. Oh, if anybody has questions about Portugal, feel free to ask me too. $1 million.
Actually way cheaper.
Okay, next we have Omri. Omri's going to be presenting remotely. I can see his face here. Omri, can you please try speaking? Because we've had a little trouble on the line in the room.
Yeah, I apologize, I'm there in person. I hope that you can hear me.
All right, we apologize that he couldn't be there in person, but if we all agree, I'm gonna suggest we take 5 minutes. We do have a little bit of space in the agenda. Go get a coffee. I'm gonna troubleshoot and try to make sure that we can hear Omri come back. Thank you.
All right, I think we have it working. I've unmuted the line and we can get started. Omri, I'll forward the slides for you.
To call in remotely. I apologize for not being there in person. So this will be the next best thing here. I'm here talking about OpZen, one of the newer work groups on behalf of the co-chairs. I'm one of the co-chairs, so is David Rosar and Jerry Gable. Going into the next slide, actually, before we get into the next slide, just a very brief history of OpZen because it may be relatively new to some of you. Sometime in kind of mid to late 2023, a few of us authorization heads observed that we really had no standards that were viable in the authorization space and hadn't had any in quite some time. And we decided that there was pretty a fair amount of low-hanging fruit in terms of trying to draw some standards in the space, and specifically between the policy enforcement point, which is the component that asks the question, can this subject execute this action on this resource? And a policy decision point, which is the component of that question, does this subject or can this subject execute this action on this resource? And so that's what we set out to go focus on. We started the working group in late 2023. If we go to the next slide, I believe that the last time I gave an update here was October, and so it wasn't until a month afterwards that we our first implementers draft, November 2024, which defines the core API, which is the evaluation API that defines the wire format for being able to ask the question, can this subject execute this action on this resource? Since then, we've actually made a lot of progress. That implementers draft came after 3 informal interop events that we did, one in IIW 2024, one in EIC 2024, and then one at OpenID 2024, where we got a lot of real world experience with trying to interoperate between an application or a line party and a set of implementations that PDP implementations that implemented that draft. Since then, we've made a lot of progress as well. In January, we came out with the second draft. This is not an implementer draft, but this is a work group draft that defines another API, the evaluations API, which is a batch API for being able to execute multiple evaluation requests in the same HTTP.
Where was I? I was describing the evaluations batch API, which is something that we published as a working group draft in January. And this is a batch API that we were able to go do some interops at Authenticate. We showed this at KubeCon and also at Gartner IAM 2024 as a preview. Incidentally, the KubeCon talk that I gave about Auth0 was very well attended. It had 450 registrations and probably about 250 people in the room. So a lot of interest from the developer community on authorization and authorization standards. And then in March, we created another working group draft that defines another scenario, the search scenario, which basically answers the question, which subjects can perform this action on this resource, or which resources can this subject perform an action on, or between the subject and this resource, which actions can be performed. So these are 3 different variations or use cases on search APIs. And lastly, as part of the interop event that we ran in March at Gartner IAM, we started working on what would it look like to formalize an API gateway profile. So one of the policy enforcement points that we believe is a very, will be a very, a prevalent policy enforcement point will be an API gateway. And we started defining what an API gateway profile for Auth0 would look like as a policy enforcement point. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we did for Gartner IAM in March in London, and what that interop scenario looks like. So we defined 2 policy enforcement points. I guess this is a build slide, so let's build it out. The first one is, the first enforcement point is the API gateway. And this was a first for us at Gartner IAM. This is the first time that we introduced the API gateway as a formalized enforcement point. And so if you click again, the idea is that there's a to-do application that is kind of our showcase demo app. It's a very simple application. People have seen it many times before, and so it's very easy to grok what's going on. And the first policy enforcement point does what we call medium-grained or functional authorization. It basically asks the PDP, can this user execute this HTTP method on this particular resource? And the resource is the HTTP route. So can this user create to-dos by issuing a post on the to-do endpoint? Can this user delete a to-do, but meaning issue a delete HTTP method on the path /to-do/ID, and so on and so forth. And if that API gateway allows the operation, then we go to the next enforcement point. If you click again and again, that will be the original to-do scenario that we defined, which is fine-grained authorization. This is the relying party itself, the to-do backend code that's a Node.js application that asks the question, can this user execute this fine-grained permission? So can they delete a to-do, or can they view a user, or can they view the to-dos, where the resource in question is not an HTTP method, but is the actual to-do with a particular to-do ID and with a property of an owner ID. So two different enforcement points. So this added quite a bit of complexity to the scenario. If we go to the next slide. This is what we had as of December 2024. So we focused entirely on getting PDPs to the party. And we had 14 entities, 12 that were current with draft 02 and implementers draft 01. So as of December, which was Gartner IAM, where we gave a talk on Auth0, we had a fair number of folks at the table, but all of them were PDP vendors. So this is good news. It means that PDP vendors are excited about defining a common interoperability standard. They're not so obsessed with differentiating on the protocol for talking to the PDP. If we go to the next slide. So in January, we defined this new interop spec, and we really ballooned the number of parties at the table. So we added 5 PDPs to the policy decision point list, including a couple of important ones like AWS, Amazon verified permissions with their open source product Cedar, as well as the Okta folks with their open source project OpenFGA, and then WSO2 with their identity server, which also has a fine-grained authorization system. And then brand new in March were 7 API gateway vendors. So Amazon API Gateway, Broadcom's L7 Gateway, Envoy, which is a very popular cloud native gateway, the Kong Gateway, Tyke, WSO2 has an API gateway as well, and Zuplo. So those are brand new vendors to our ecosystem that we were able to bring for the Gartner IAM show. So by and large, we felt like this was very successful. Next slide. So just to finish here, thank you, Elizabeth, for kind of putting some pictures from the Gartner IAM event. I think Gail mentioned that we had lines to the Auth0 interop event, as well as the Shared Signals interop event that went, kind of around the corner, so to speak. A lot of people really wanted to see this. Our roadmap is, I've already said, the evaluation API is stable, is not going to change. Draft 02 with evaluations is also stable. The search APIs have appeared in a workgroup draft. We believe that those things, as well as partial evaluation and discovery, will go into a second implementers draft. And that is basically the extent of the surface area that we believe will make up Auth0 1.0 final. We want to optimistically get to final sometime in the summer or fall. Other things that we're excited about to work on in 2025 include formalizing the gateway profile. Again, this is going to be a very common authorization enforcement point. We want to start looking at event delivery for stateful PDPs. So this is PDPs that keep track of state, like especially relationship-based access control systems like Topaz or OpenFGA or others. We think that shared signals is a great mechanism for doing that. We want to start looking at that sometime in the second half of this year. And then we also believe that there is another enforcement point, natural enforcement point, which is the IDP itself. When it goes through an authentication ceremony, it can call an authzen PDP in a standard way, that could be a standard extension point for being able to either kind of fail the authentication request based on additional fine-grained authorization criteria, policy criteria, or it can actually enrich the access token that it is minting with a set of claims or scopes that can be the result of a search call. And so this is another profile that we think would be great to create. In terms of commercial implementations, there are some that are already in the product. So for example, Topaz from Acerto has native authzen APIs or endpoints as of March. Zuplo, an API gateway, has native authzen built into the product. We've heard from the AWS or the Amazon team that they are planning on getting native authzen support into Cedar sometime later this year. So we're starting to see all of these in production level implementations as well. So that is more or less the update here for authzen. Unfortunately, I think since I can't hear any questions, they'll either have to be in the chat or maybe you can give them to Elizabeth and she can type them in the Slack and I can answer them.
Probably can't hear me either.
No, Omri can't hear you.
All of the interoper participants. So it sounds like a great showing.
Yes. And if there are questions, I just want to be clear, can the people on the line can hear me, correct? It's just Omri?
Correct.
Yeah, we can hear you, Elizabeth, on Zoom.
Excellent. So if there are questions, we can have someone, because I think we have a couple of people logged into Zoom in the room. We can have people repeat the questions from the room. So if there are questions online, that'll work. If there are questions in the room. Oh, he can't hear anything, can he? Okay.
We have to step in quick.
Yes, that's true. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll just move on. I'm gonna send him a little thank you on Slack real quick. All right, or I'll put it in the chat. He's probably watching the chat at this point. Okay, all right, we're gonna move on. So next up we have IPSI. And Aaron is in a meeting, so we've got Dean. Did Aaron let you know that?
Yeah.
He expressed his full confidence in you as he left.
Aaron and I had a quick chat about it.
Okay, good.
All right. Now I get to say all the bad things about Aaron. No, if you know Aaron, you know there's nothing bad to say about him. All right. Again, I'm Dean Sachs. I'm one of the co-chairs of the IPSI working group, along with Aaron. Sad that he can't be here at the moment, but all right. So I want to talk a little about IPSI. So IPSI is the interoperability profiles for secure identity in the enterprise, and it is an entire mouthful, and that is the last time you'll hear me expand that acronym. So when Aaron first reached out to me about chartering IPSI, the idea was that we really have some challenges with enterprise identity. There are interoperability challenges and there are security challenges, and they basically boil down to lots and lots of standards, many different ways to implement each standard because there's lots of optionality in each of the standards. And this leads to some IDP specific implementations, which is quite high cost if you're a relying party. Similarly, on the security side, the threat landscape is ever evolving, and a lot of the existing standards that are out there, while they do have security considerations and can be implemented securely, they are not necessarily always going to be implemented securely. It depends on the specific choices that a developer or a dev team makes. And here's Aaron, just in time. So SSO alone, while it is great to combat a number of the known identity threats that we have, is not sufficient by itself. Okay, that's not working. Oh wait, there we go. Have to hit the right button. All right, so in comes IPSI. Come on, Aaron, come on up here. So in the charter scope for IPSI, we really covered 6 different areas. Do we have a second mic for Aaron, or yes. Do you want us to pass?
Oh, yours is the two.
Oh, oops. Is it not working? Hello? Oh, wait, there we go. That's better. Okay. All right. So, so in the charter, there were really 6 items in scope for us: single sign-on, entitlements, session termination, lifecycle management of the user, risk signal sharing, and token revocation. But the goal here was really not to create anything new. Rather to define profiles with existing standards that reduce the optionality, reduce the ambiguity, and promote consistency, interoperability, and security. Basically, minimize the choices that IDPs and RPs have to make to provide a secure, interoperable set of services, including single sign-on and the other 5 things here in the scope. What else do you want to say to you?
Yeah, so just as like as an example, OpenID Connect is obviously used for single sign-on. However, there's like a bunch of different ways you can use it. There's different patterns. There's different reasons you might use the different patterns. There's a lot of options and extensions. And the goal here is to say, like, this is how you use OpenID Connect in an enterprise context for enterprise, as an enterprise IDP integrating with enterprise applications. So it is explicitly to, like, that is the target use case. There's a very specific audience and reader that we're expecting, and we're trying to make it so that there is exactly one way to do it instead of a bunch of different ways. So not that there's anything wrong with having a flexible spec, it's just that once you need to actually write some code, you need to know exactly what to write. So that's the goal here.
And I think it's important to say, when we talk about enterprises, we had this word created a lot of debate in the early weeks of IPSI. If you define yourself as an enterprise, you're an enterprise, is probably the easiest way to put it. If you think that this profile works for you and the tools that you need to use, then you're an enterprise. You could be in education, you could be in government, you could be a traditional Fortune 500. You're all enterprises, but it's really a self-defined thing. So if this maps to how you operate, then you simply are an enterprise.
And we did try to make an actual definition and it's on the GitHub repo for like what we mean by this, but it's essentially like if you're trying to manage your applications and data under the control of the organization, we're not trying to say it's about business structure or anything like that, but it's about control over resources, basically.
That's right. That's right. Go
ahead. Cool. Yeah. So working group update. The working group started in October last year. Been a lot of that sort of background discussion going on at the beginning, and then it turned into this idea of, let's, instead of having there be IPSI or not, it's actually levels of IPSI and different, so defining the kind of maturity path that we expect organizations as their needs grow. Their needs are more complex, but there are simpler structural organizations that might have simpler needs, still would benefit from some more standardization and formality around this. So there are 2 tracks. There's the session lifecycle track and the identity lifecycle track, kind of like login and provisioning. And within those tracks, there are 3 levels, and we've the levels, each additional level gives the organization more capabilities and more level of control. But we're not saying that everybody needs to be at the top. That's just like it's the most complicated. So it's some organizations are going to want the most level of control and level of detail, but some may not care about the things that the higher levels provide, which is fine. So we're trying to make it so that there's like multiple, there's different ways to kind of get into this. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's critically important for us. And I was speaking to Justin Richer, I believe it was, about NIST 863 and the challenges they have with levels, and that, you know, everyone's like, oh, I have to get to IAL3, AAL3, FAL3, when that may not be actually necessary for your business needs. And so one of the things that we have to do as we continue documenting IPSI is write down specific verbiage that says, not everything needs to get to the highest level of IPSI. It doesn't have to be SL3, IL3 in every instance. There are reasons why you would choose SL1, IL3, or IL1, SL3, and everything and every other mix that's in there.
Yeah, so the current status is essentially like the levels are defined. There's a general agreement on the contents of what we expect in there. We have a couple of initial drafts that are not yet adopted drafts, but been proposed to the work to tackle the first level of session lifecycle. We had a webinar a couple weeks ago.
A month ago
Oh
now,
my
I
God, it was
guess?
a month ago.
Yeah, it was a month.
Yeah, okay.
We've both been traveling, so
Yeah.
time is immaterial.
Right, it was before IETF week. So had a good panel discussion with the familiar faces you see on the screen. Lot of good attendees on that panel live, and it's recordings available as well. Mostly talking about the again, like the background of the group and the goals and setting out the context for what the work is.
And we had a second webinar with Mike Schwartz from Glue on the Identity Office Hours, where two members of the IPSI working group who have not been people that you would have normally seen up here speaking or in these groups, they're relatively new to the standards community, actually spent time speaking about their engagement with IPSI. So one of the things that I'm most happy about right now is how we're seeing engagement from people who have previously not been engaged in this space before. And I think that's a real positive thing for this working group and just standards bodies in general. So these are the, and wow, that's an eye chart if you're sitting in the back of the room. These are the IPSI levels. We're not going to go through them, but we just want to show that we do have the levels. As Aaron said, there are 3 levels for each of the session lifecycle and the identity lifecycle. And there are obligations for both the application, what you might know as the RP, or the identity service, which roughly translates to the IDP, but may represent more than just the IDP. There are obligations at each of these levels for each side of the transaction. And we specifically chose to do it this way in order to focus on the outcomes that we want to achieve, not necessarily the mechanisms, because we didn't start with the mechanism of you must use OpenID Connect, or you must use SCIM, or you must use OpenID provider commands. We started with these are the outcomes, and now we're injecting what are the actual standards that we want to build around to achieve these outcomes. Go ahead.
Yeah, so oops. So the OpenID Connect profile is a draft that I started. I submitted it to the working group. There's been several weeks now of discussing some of the details on it. There is an open call for adoption on the draft that ends on next Thursday, I think.
I believe that's correct.
17th. There is another draft that describes how to apply SAML to achieve the goals described in SL1. Contributed to the working group, not draft, a working group. Words are hard. Contributed to the working group, not yet proposed for adoption, but there's, I think it's been discussed once or twice on the calls now, but.
Actually, we haven't really discussed on the calls at all. It's been contributed, but there's been some private conversations, but we have not brought it to the call yet.
Yeah.
That'll probably happen on our next call next week.
Got it. And then for the identity lifecycle, also known as provisioning, there's no text draft proposed yet, but it's likely to will likely end up somebody will write a draft describing how to apply SCIM to achieve those goals. But again, the idea with these drafts is describing how you take an existing spec, OpenID Connect, SAML, or SCIM, or whatever it is, and describe the parts of it that you need to implement in order to achieve the outcomes that were on the last chart of like the features that you get at the first level. So both from both perspectives.
And for the identity lifecycle 1 profile, there are 2 working group members who have agreed to start working on that. We have not seen a draft yet, but those folks are at least starting on that draft. Now, our ultimate goal for this year is to get to an interop event at Gartner IAM in December of this year, to do an interop event at SL1, so Session Lifecycle 1. So obviously that means we have a lot of work to do between now and then in order to be able to get the draft adopted, get to the point where we have something reasonably stable that people can implement against, and then define what that interop is going to be. So look for more information on that over the next couple of months. And with that, we encourage you to join the working group. Check out our GitHub repo if you need details on what we're doing. And Aaron and I will be here today and through IIW this week if y'all have questions. Yeah, take questions now. Atul, here, let me run this to you.
Thank you. So just on the previous slide, I think you had a column for application and a column for identity service. Is there like some kind of an architecture you're implying an enterprise should have an identity service and have an, and is there like an architecture draft that you're sort of coming up with?
Yeah, the architecture draft is it's rough right now, but there is a file in the GitHub repo that kind of describes some of the terminology. So essentially what we mean by identity service is all of the things that the enterprise runs to manage the identities within the enterprise. So starts with an IDP where the users have an account, which can do single sign-on into applications, but it might also encompass tools like threat monitoring services or like just kind of the sort of infrastructure rather than things that are providing like business applications. So like business applications would fall into this application side, but if it's part of the like management of the business applications, it's on the identity service side.
Right. I mean, you have things like XDR and device management and which are not necessarily identity services.
That's what that side is meant to encompass, and that's why it's not called IDP. Yeah. We can finesse the naming, but that's the intent of that column.
Yeah, I mean, this was an active discussion in the early calls about, we shouldn't call it an IDP because an IDP is a very specific term of art and means a very specific thing. And we were really looking for something that was more all-encompassing for all of the services that the enterprise has that support identity, IDP and all the other things we've mentioned. It's a little fuzzy. I will give you that, but you can, if in a more simplified architecture, you can just read that as IDP. But as your architecture gets more complex, of course, more and more elements will be pulled in there.
Any other questions for Gina and Aaron? Online included? I heard them. Okay. No one jumps in. I think it's time for a tool. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Atul. I'm CTO of Signal and a co-chair of the Shared Signals Working Group. So I'm going to try a little trick here and see if it works. Voila. I added a couple of slides, right now, and so I wanted to get them. So I saw that everyone was talking about what shared, what their group was, and I didn't have any slides on that. So the shared signals framework is basically a great way to, reliably provide information asynchronously between cooperating parties. You get a very good framework for negotiating what type of information you want to exchange about whom. And you also get some controls about sort of starting, stopping, pausing, restarting streams. And then on top of that, you have various sort of application profiles, if you will, right? So you have the risk profile, which provides in events about account security issues, right? So things can be, there's an event and risk, for example, that credential change is required. What that would mean is that the sender believes that the user's credential may be compromised, and so they are saying that we are going to require this user to change their credential. CAPE, on the other hand, is all about session management. So it's about conveying events that can impact the properties of a login session. Right? So that could mean things like session revoked. So the sender is claiming that they've revoked the session, or it could mean that recently a new event got added called risk level change. So the sender believes that the risk of that session has changed, or simple things like the device is no longer under management, or the assurance level has changed, and things like that. Now, recently in the IETF, there was a draft called SCIM events. This is a way of conveying account management changes using potentially using shared signals. So it doesn't require the use of shared signals, but it provides that as an option. So these are various profiles, if you will, on top of shared signals. And I can imagine that in the future we may have more of these. So in a nutshell, just sort of restating what I said in the previous part, you have a shared signals transmitter and a shared signals receiver. And okay, I think the arrow is reversed. It should be, no, and it's right, it's right. So the receiver sort of initiates the communication to the transmitter. It says that I want, to talk about these events. I want to listen to these events. I want to listen to them about these users. They can start, stop, and pause streams and things like that. But the actual events go back through the asynchronous transport, right, which is the dotted arrows. And the asynchronous transport is basically all about just JARs. So all you're sending is JARs, and then on top of that you have a particular structure to the JARs called security event tokens. And those security event tokens define certain fields, including a field called events. And then CAPE, risk, SCIM events, they all sort of specify what those events can be, right? So it's like a very simple way of conveying information. All right, so here's the update on the specs work that we're doing, right? So we have now identified a set of issues that if we address those issues in our PR, the working group believes that we're ready for the final spec. So these are the 3 specs that will go to final after those issues have been resolved. So we'll propose to the OpenID Foundation to make these specs final, and then we'll go through the review process and all that. Now, most of those issues are relating to the implementation feedback that we got because we've done all these interoperability tests, and we now have some of these real world implementations out there. And then there was one issue about how the spec itself was organized. Some of the information was all the way down in a different section, and it overlapped with the information in some other sections. So we just sort of rationalized that a little bit, right? We've been sort of doing a few of these interoperability events, and we in December had a very good interoperability event with a large number of vendors, like you see over here at the Gartner IM conference in Texas. And one of the interesting things there was the requirement was not that you should have everything in your product, but you should have plans of having those features implemented in those products at some point in the future, right? And so we had all these recognizable names come to the party, and were able to show real world use cases about how their customers can use shared signals and CAPE or risk in order to communicate security changes about their accounts or sessions. We repeated the event in March, just a few weeks back. And we had a large number of participants, as you can see here. The thing that we did differently in London was that we required the participants to pass the conformance tests if they were a transmitter, right? So the conformance tests were developed by the OpenID Foundation. Thanks very much to Thomas Darrimont, I think, who's attending remotely. That was a great piece of work, and we were all able to pass our implementations using those conformance tests, and then we were able to qualify to participate in the interoperability event. So we've been raising the bar for every interoperability event that we did. This was the 3rd one that we did for shared signals. Now, a quick note about adoption. So you're now seeing real world products announce and require support for SSF. So you're seeing, for example, Apple, Okta, Signal, my company, Jamf, and all of these companies actually support SSF in their shipping products and services that are out there today. And then we also see some announcements about betas and plans to implement SSF and things like that from various other companies. You're also seeing independent sort of consortia come together to have specific things supported, like for example, login.gov, ID.me, and I think the IRS now support risk for account management. So we of course have some legacy things that are out there, which is, Google has a risk service that supports an older version of the spec, and Microsoft internally uses something that is very similar to CAPE. It's not actually CAPE, but it is inspired by that, by the same underlying technology. So what are we going to do this year, right? So we've obviously done the interoperability event. We want to move to final, like I said. We want to also have conformance tests move to final, both for the transmitter and receiver. I don't know how much of that we'll be able to do in this year, but the goal is to try and get there. We're working on a shared signals white paper for financial services. There was a lot of interest from certain groups in Chile, in Brazil, and some other geographies about how they can use shared signals in the financial services sector. And we thought it would be good to articulate the applicability of shared signals in that sector through a white paper. And we are hoping to do that pending board approval, which I think is one of the items on the agenda today. And there's also an interesting development with the Aspen Institute, for which I will hand the mic over to Kay.
Yeah, just a quick heads up. This is an initiative that the Aspen Institute here in the US has been coordinating. I mentioned it at the beginning as part of the thought leadership. They are investigating fraud very much in depth with a bunch of digital platforms, major banks, policy leaders, with an intent to try and provide guidance on some potential technical solutions and policy recommendations for Congress, amongst other government officials. And so as part of that due diligence, we have been actively participating in a couple of the work streams. Elizabeth joined one of the in-person meetings, and I've been listening in along the way. And we've regularly brought up to them the potential of shared signals to help as part of the solution design for the next phase of work that they're about to enter into. And I think that's being well received. It also happened to come up in discussion with the New York Fed last week.
Awesome, thank you. Well, that's all I had. So any questions?
In the diagram, what are we showing earlier? The initiate actually happens from the transmitter, right? Or something like that. So it is being possible to have the initiation actually also happen from the receiver.
Actually, the transmitter exposes the SSF API and the receiver calls it. So the arrow I'm showing is the receiver actually calling the transmitter to setting up the stream to start, stop, pause the stream and all that. So it is from the receiver to the transmitter. But the events go from the transmitter to the receiver, of course. That's why it's called the transmitter. And just to be sure, an entity can be both a transmitter and a receiver.
Other questions?
Anything online, Mike? Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Atul. All right, Bjorn, you're up next.
It's going the wrong way.
Hey, my name is Bjorn. I am the co-chair of the Moderna Working Group. As a background, Moderna was created as a support for a development within the GSMA organization to support mobile cooperators being in IDP. And the Moderna Working Group was doing the technical work on behalf of the GSMA. Okay. So the working group has a few specifications that are already in the implementers draft and one in final. The one in final is the CEVA core spec. The current work by the working group is to complete the working group last calls on the discovery profile, which again is similar to the discovery, the profile of the OpenID Connect discovery spec, and also the Moderna CBA profile. Some of you may know there is a FAPI CBA profile, and so the way we did the CBA core was to have a complete set of options in the CBA core, and then depending on the use case, you could write a profile of that CBA core. And so similar to that, there's a FAPI CBA profile, there's also a Moderna CBA profile. There's, as Mike Jones mentioned during the Connect update, there is an errata to the CBA core. So thanks to Mike, there is an initial draft of the CBA core errata. There is an additional issue that will also go into the CBA core errata. So that's another specification that the group is moving forward with.
Actually, Joe DeCock doing the software wrote the CBOR core. CBOR core update. I helped him, but he wrote it.
In addition to this, the working group has, again, it has a history of doing outreach programs. And so in the beginning of it, it had close collaboration with the GSMA community. GSMA community is an industry organization of mobile network operators globally. So besides GSMA, also there's outreach to ETSI in the Camara project. And so the Camara project is a Linux Foundation initiative. In essence, it is Mobile Connect 2.0. And so instead of defining a set of services, the Camara project just published APIs for similar functionality. When we started this outreach, we had certain intention that the relationship would be similar to the way the OpenID Foundation worked with GSMA. That has not panned out the way we had hoped for. So they're still working on APIs based on OpenID Connect specifications, but the interaction is not as close as initially intended, put it that way. When we started this effort within Moderna, GSMA was a member of the foundation with events taking place and financial impacts of those events. GSMA dropped off as a member, so we've been working on engaging with GSMA to have a liaison agreement, and so that's what this is referring to. Those were the updates from Moderna. If there are questions, I can take them now, or I will go to the next topic. No questions. Okay.
Any questions on the line? No.
No. Oh, sorry, I do have one slide. Again, as I mentioned, we're working on taking two specs through our working group last call and into implementers draft. Again, as I mentioned, we do have a second version of the errata being planned for probably third quarter. And then towards the end of the year, having a liaison agreement with GSMA. There's a legal tangle involved in it, hence the delay in getting it done. So next topic. So ITU. So ITU is the International Telecom Union, and it's part of UN. It's one of those formal SDOs. Similar to ISO, where the foundation has taken several OpenID Connect specifications and got them adopted by ISO. A similar effort has been to get this through ITU. Now, the purpose of this is that there are parts of the world where in order for a government, well, a government will require that a formal SDO specifications are used for implementations of certain functionalities. So it's either ISO or it's ITU, depending on where you are in the world. The foundation is not recognized as one of those formal SDOs. And so part of the purpose here is to allow for implementations of OpenID Connect functionality in parts of the world where it either has to be an ISO or an ITU specification. In the ISO approach, there was the adoption of the OpenID Connect specification was by reference. And so that meant that we could have a cover sheet and you would publish the specification as is, just with an ISO cover sheet. Through our conversations with the ITUT study group, we discussed by reference and by implementation. By implementation means that you actually have to take the OpenID Connect specification and reformat it to format of, in this case, the ITU. Given political environment and stakeholders involved, there was a request to do by incorporation. So we have taken the first step of formatting the OpenID Connect core specification to the ITUT format to get it reviewed and feedback on whether what we're submitting is acceptable and approved by the all the delegates of that study group. And so that's where we are in the process. The meeting is the week after this, where they will discuss and review the draft that's been submitted. The reason for doing this with one spec rather than all of them is to kind of test the water. Again, we had to change around some of the references and the format of the spec. It is not the same as the format of a Connect spec, the way they do things. And also how they refer to references. If it's not a recognized SDO and published specification, it has to be put in a different part and called something else like biography rather than just pure references. And so there was that a lot of modifications, well, I would say a lot. There was modification to the spec, I'll say that. So after the meeting next week, we'll have a feedback on whether that is acceptable or if they would need more changes. At that point, there may be a decision that there are too many changes that the Connect spec is not the Connect spec anymore. It may not make sense to take it to IT. So I know that's a long-ranging update to what should be a simple process, but it's been everything but simple.
Thank you. Just a quick nod of appreciation to Bjorn for the thankless task of trying to navigate the ITU approach. But as he said, we're not planning to make material or substantive changes to the specs, but if ITU is a channel to amplify the specs and help it reach markets that are not using our specs, then that's great. And we're piloting it with one of our most stable, most mature, most well deployed, being OpenID Connect 4. So thank you for the hard work on that. And I guess while we're on this topic, you've seen we've been doing the same with ISO. So we're doing that with OpenID Connect, which is now a publicly available spec with ISO, and Hadari is at the lead to submit the next wave, which is OpenID for identity assurance, as well as FAPI1, and then Mark Verstegi is on the point for FAPI2 submission. So we're trying to do our best to make sure that as many implementers as possible can get access to the specs, and if they prefer and enjoy seeing them in an ISO or ITU context, we want to help support.
Are there any questions? Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you. I admire how much you communicate through the long pause. I think it's great.
I'll choose some words.
All right, it's me now. I'm here today with 3 hats on. Number 1, audiovisual support. I'm not doing so great at that one, but it is hat number 1. Hat number 2 is I'm the marketing and strategy director at OpenID Foundation, and hat number 3 is I am the City Hub program manager and secretariat. So I'm giving the City Hub overview with that 3rd hat today. And Gail will jump in, I assume. I think I have plenty of time for this update, but if you wouldn't mind watching, 10 minutes is my max. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gail. Okay, so City Hub, we've been at the last 3, maybe even 4 of these sessions with brief updates about what City Hub is doing. But for anyone who doesn't remember the context, City Hub was established to try and bring a global multi-stakeholder community together to collaborate on the requirements for achieving global interoperability for digital identity, primarily government-issued identities. We have had over 25 countries engaged in that work so far. We've engaged in intergovernmental organizations like the OECD, the World Bank, UNHCR, the United Nations Development Program, quite a few others. We've had academic partners and a great number of identity nonprofits in the space. And when I say we've engaged with them, we've done so in 2 formats. We've had summits on 4 continents. So we had our 4 continents, 5 summits to date. The first one being in 2023 in Paris. We then went to ID for Africa and had a full day event in Cape Town. We had an event in Berlin prior to EIC last year, an event in Washington, DC, and our final event so far was the one that we held in October in Tokyo, which was amazing. Thank you so much, OpenID Japan. No hero. And yes, our next event is going to be at ID for Africa again in Addis Ababa in May. City Hub was founded with a few key principles in mind. Number 1, human centricity, so putting the person at the heart of the work and ensuring that all of the solutions that we recommend and everything that we're designing has human rights at the center. Domestic sovereignty, the assumption that there is not going to be a single protocol to rule them all, a single standard. We want to be able to leave local markets to make decisions about architecture, about format themselves, and then help create patterns of interoperating. Our other foundations are our multilateral engagement, grounding everything in real life use cases, and then focusing on not just the technology, but also the policy and making sure that we normalize both. So following the strategy in 2024, we have now published, some of these still say in progress. That's because it's an old slide. They're not in progress anymore. They are all published on the City Hub website. We've got 9 reports. So reports after each individual event. We have reports about 3 champion use cases. Last year, we focused on the refugee use case, which we have also expanded but have not yet published a report about displaced persons in the context of disaster relief. Then we have a use case about education and education credentials, and also opening a bank account. And then we also have 2 other reports that kind of bring a lot of this thinking together. Number 1 is about global credential ecosystem governance. Specifically, that goes into the issues of managing trust across different ecosystems, looking at existing models for trust frameworks, and building a roadmap of how do we address emerging architectures in that context. And then also, how do you bridge between local jurisdiction-based trust frameworks and policymaking, and also global or cross-border ecosystems for credentials. So that paper delves into that and sets a roadmap for further work. And then our end of year report really summarizes all of the above and sets out what we want to achieve in the near, medium, long term. And what that is and what we're talking about is, that headline's wrong, I'll fix it. What we're talking about is really building out what we're calling a digital commons. That's a open suite of policy, technical, and other tools to enable all parties who are looking to implement and design digital identity solutions, whether that's a local jurisdiction or more of a transnational ecosystem, giving them access to best practice that is open and openly available. So that's both an act of creation and also an act of curation. And that's what we're bringing together in our working groups. Now, do I have another slide? I don't have another slide, but we have 2 work streams currently going on. We have a technical work stream, which met this morning, super early, 6 a.m. And that work stream is looking at trust management at the moment. There were questions that I need to put to Mike Jones and Josephine that came up on that call this morning. And I was in the gym with Joseph at the time, but I didn't bother him with those questions. So that is very active. We're looking at trust management. How do you enable actors in one ecosystem to establish trust and manage and maintain trust with an actor from another ecosystem? What are the existing models for doing that right now? So for example, we're looking at OpenID Federation. We're looking at Lucy's work in RegiTrust. We're looking at Train. We're looking at systems in EIDAS. I don't want to leave anyone out, but we're looking at sort of 6 or 7 existing models of thinking, whether they're actual implementations or just conceptual models. And yeah, the goal there is to start to do a bit of a gap analysis about what exists in the market today and create kind of a roadmap for what could be in this commons. At the same time, so that was the tech work stream. The other work stream that's very active is the trust framework work stream, which is looking to build on the work of the Open Identity Exchange, OIX. So we're expanding their DNA of trust framework analysis to include more countries. And we're also trying to bridge that with those cross-border ecosystems that exist in the context of one use case. So looking at a trust framework in the context of, for example, the Financial Action Task Force and their recommendations to financial services institutions all around the world, regardless of jurisdiction. We're also looking at various UN frameworks overlaying that. And I think the other piece to call out for this year is the concept of the attestation rulebook, which they have in Europe. And we're looking at like whether there are ways that we can support making a standard approach to defining a rulebook in this work stream. So that's policy. And then we have some other initiatives going on where we're looking at whether we can proceed with other use cases, but we're trying to find some grant funding for that. And overall looking at what the long-term model is for City Hub. So with that, I'll pause. I'll let Gail jump in, as I'm sure she wants to.
We only have 2 minutes left, so I think probably open it up to the audience. Questions? I think this week you're going to call a session on City Hub at some point, right?
Quite probably. Yeah, I was getting past today.
Yeah.
And then I'll think about what sessions I'm calling tomorrow. But yeah, definitely want to chat to people about City Hub. Probably will end up calling the session.
While we're waiting, big thanks to Nihiro for helping to organize the Tokyo event last October. So big thanks to OpenID Foundation Japan and you personally, Nihiro.
It was a really great event.
Did you mention Ethiopia?
I did. May ID for Africa will be in Ethiopia. If anyone else is there.
We're waiting to hear from the UN IGF to see if our workshop is accepted. So hopefully we hope for good news in the next few days.
Indeed. Any questions from the room or online? None. Okay, so with that, I will give you to Joseph, who's going to basically see us from now until the end of the workshop because he does so very much for the foundation. Thank you, Joseph.
Maybe with one late breaking edition with some interrupt results that
Yeah.
Julia and I hope to share. So
That's
we'll see if
true.
we get
We'll let him sit down for that, maybe.
Cool, right, that's nice. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So, hey everyone. Yep, I'm going to start by talking to you about FAPI. I don't actually have an introductory slide, but the quick introduction to FAPI is it's a high security and interoperability profile for OAuth 2. It's seeing a lot of adoption in open data ecosystems, particularly open banking, open finance, that kind of thing, but also increasingly in health and those kind of things. The big news this time is that FAPI 2 is the security profile and the attacker model are now published as final specs. That has been a long path, but we've had a lot of people waiting for those. They are finally published as final. There are no more excuses for people not to adopt them, because we have been getting excuses from various banks in various countries that, oh, we can't use that, it's not final, but it's final now. They can use it. So let's see what the next excuse is. And we have conformance tests under development. I have a piece about conformance tests at the end as well, but for FAPI, we have FAPI 2 final, we have the conformance tests under development. Beta is going to be sometime this month. Absolutely would be very happy if anybody approaches me that wants to test those tests before we actually launch a certification program, because we do like to actually prove these things work before we start certifying people. And we have a whole bunch of ecosystem updates. So OpenID Foundation, we're in the process of getting involved in the BIS project, Aperta, I pronounced that right, which is looking at cross-border interoperability of open finance. So we're hopeful they'll use FAPI there, and because obviously many of the ecosystems they're trying to connect together are already using FAPI. So that's good. Select ID in the UK, that's the UK kind of private ecosystem that some other banks and so on are getting involved with to do sharing of identity data using the eKYC specifications. They're using FAPI. They're planning to, what they did launch in March. Connect ID, Select ID, Chilium, Money are all looking at I'm not sure that's quite right, but definitely Chile we've been having a lot of conversations with about them adopting the grant management spec, which is great because that's one of the specs that the FAPI working group produced, which standardizes a problem that we know exists in open banking ecosystems, that everybody's having to do their kind of grant management specs in a bespoke way. So this standardizes it. Now that hopefully, fingers crossed, Chile or Colombia will actually roll it out and prove it, we'll be able to take those specs to final once we've got that implementation experience to show that they work. We are back talking with the Australian government again, so that they're already a big user of FAPI in their consumer data rights legislation. Hopefully we manage to expand the OIDF specs and tools they use. We've got several other ecosystems that we're talking about. So I think we've got a trip planned to Rwanda to talk to them about FAPI. And which did I miss, Gail?
I forgot to put FDX on that list.
Oh, yes.
Blue. Certainly.
Yes, FDX have another profile that uses FAPI, so they're moving on to FAPI 2 as well, actually, which is great news. Again, they were waiting for it to go final. Now it's final, they're jumping on it. And actually, myself and Gail are at the FDX conference the week after next to tell them all about that. And yes, and we have FAPI merchandise available. I'm sorry, I do actually have it with me. I'll wear my FAPI t-shirt later in the week. So yeah, so at some point in the week, I will be wearing my FAPI shirt. And if you would like one, please talk to Elizabeth and she'll tell you how to get one of your own. Okay, so I have a lot of slides now that summarize the difference between FAPI 2 implementers draft and FAPI 2 final. I'm not actually going to walk through them all. We do have a blog post that actually goes through the detail. Thank you very much for Dima, wherever he is, for leading that blog post and getting most of the content there. There he is. Thank you, Dima, for that. It's greatly appreciated to get that content there. I think the good news is it's actually a pretty easy migration, even though there's a lot of text here. There's really one big breaking change, or potentially breaking change, to do with the audience value in private key job client authentications. That was a big new normative clause that was added in FAPI2 final as a way to try and mitigate the security vulnerability, or the potential security vulnerability, that was found with those assertions, which actually FAPI2, the implemented draft, was already not vulnerable to, but the final actually tightens it up a bit. And the extra text means that the clients will hopefully actually implement the right behavior, which moves you from theoretical security to hopefully real security. I don't mean that quite as flippantly as it sounds. And yeah, there's lots of other changes, as I say, but that's the thing. And in terms of what the FAPI working group's actually working on now, we have FAPI2 message signing, which is the spec that adds the non-repudiation, which means that signed requests, signed responses, signed resource endpoint requests, signed resource endpoint responses. We're trying to move that spec to final, although we actually dropped out the signed resource endpoint requests and responses because we've not got enough implementation experience on those yet, so we don't want to take those to final yet. But the rest of FAPI2 message signing, I think we're just waiting for the process for the public review period to be announced now, and hopefully that'll be final in 70 days time once the process has run its course. And then the FAPI working group's planning to concentrate on implementation and deployment advice documents. So there's some work happening on that now, which that's aiming to provide some kind of practical guidance to ecosystems or people that want to adopt FAPI, just to answer some of the common questions and some of the common ways people might go wrong potentially. And that's everything I have on FAPI. So any questions about FAPI before we move on to the next topic?
Questions from a very sleepy Matt or a awake?
Question from Mike.
I think a couple of years ago, there was a blog post about the differences between FAPI1 final and FAPI2 then implementers drafts. Is there any plan to write a new post comparing the two and talking about the advantages of the new work?
I think, yeah, there must be a plan to write something about that. I think we have a table in the specification actually explaining the differences. Well, I'm trying to remember if we actually removed that before we went final or not, because someone did suggest it. Does Dima remember?
I think, Mike, I was thinking about the same thing, but then I think there was a blog article written by Joseph at the time. So I was thinking of taking that blog article and republishing it again. That would be changes coming. And table the differences between FAPI1 and FAPI2 is still a part specification. I tried to remember it, but it was still like.
Yeah, it should be. Shouldn't be any significant differences there, I think. And yeah, the headlines is that FAPI2 remains a slightly simpler spec that still hits the security aims. So it's nicer for developers. It has some nicer privacy properties. And yeah, people should use FAPI2. Right. Any more questions?
Online or from that?
No questions online.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. So yeah, so I'm going to talk about digital credentials protocols now. I was originally expecting that my co-chair Christina would be here with me, but I think she's got dragged into some EU stuff. I'm going to be doing this one solo, and unfortunately our other co-chair Torsten is stuck in Germany dealing with German government stuff. So you only get to hear from me. So yeah, things are moving quickly. DCP is trying to get to final specifications. And on the road to that, we've recently had 3 implementers drafts approved. I'm sure Mike will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty certain there's not been another OpenID Foundation working group that's published 3 implementers drafts in 3 months. So
Well, unless you can't connect.
that was a while ago. Yeah. So we had a new draft of OpenID for verifiable presentations just before Christmas, I think. The big addition in that was the new query language, the digital credentials query language, or DUCL as it's pronounced. That is a replacement for presentation exchange, basically. So presentation exchange has been a great spec. It's served the specification very well. It let us get the specification up and running very quickly. We're very grateful to Diff for all the help they gave us with actually making presentation exchange work in the OpenID for verifiable presentations. But we did get a lot of developer feedback that this could be simpler. And I'm oversimplifying that feedback a little bit, which is why Mike is laughing. So we did come up with a new query language, mainly driven by our Dr. Daniel Fett. I suspect he's not online as it's very late for him in Germany. We have had a lot of implementer feedback that this is much simpler. It's a very simple query language that's kind of very idiomatic JSON. And the good thing is because it's very much targeted just to be used with OpenID for VP, we didn't have to get into some of the complexities the presentation exchange has to deal with. So yeah, presentation exchange wasn't just complicated for the sake of it. It was trying to do a lot more than we were trying to do with DUCL. So DUCL is just a lot simpler because it has a much simpler scope, and we are getting really good developer feedback about DUCL. So this has been a great change. So other things, we added transaction data, which is a kind of general mechanism that allows you to, when you're getting the credential back, also have some data embedded in the credential that's signed to show that the user acknowledged it in some way. There's various use cases for that. Might get used for payments somehow. We're still debating architectures for payments, I think, but people are definitely looking at using it for document signing, so e-signatures essentially. And actually, since the last implementers draft of VP, we've actually added the SDJOT profile, which seems like a strange thing to say given how long SDJOT has been around. I think that's more saying something about how long it was since we last did an implementers draft. And we also added the X509 SAN DNS authentication method, which is the one that then got adopted in the ISO MDL working group. You're going to add something?
So Joseph, this is probably a good page to comment on what the work group hopes to tackle this week during IIW. Is there already
Yeah, I have a little bit of that on the next slide. I don't think I actually got the list in here because it's still a bit draft. But let me just finish going through the things we did do, the big changes. So the way client IDs are passed in presentation exchange, there was a big change in that in the latest implementers draft that solved a security issue. So breaking change, unfortunately, but this is why we have implementers draft and get the experience and get the feedback. We had to change the type identifier for SDJOT, unfortunately, due to a conflict with another group. And we added the browser digital credentials API appendix. So again, this is some work that's coming out of W3C. We've been working very closely with W3C. These browser APIs allow you to do OpenID for VP via essentially a JavaScript API, and it solves some user experience problems and it solves cross-device security. So this is a really important piece of work, and we're really grateful that the browser vendors have kind of worked with us and found solutions that work and really given us a way to implement cross-device flows securely, because that solves a big problem. And the other slight note to ask is that even though I'm saying we've just published the third implementers draft, if you're actually implementing, just please use the next version of the spec, draft 24, just because it fixes some MDoc things. Everybody across Europe standardizing on the draft 24 for the next round of kind of in-drop testing and stuff. Unfortunate timing, but we're managing it as best we can. So OpenID for verifiable
credential issuance. I think that came out in January, the second implementers draft. There's a few good changes in there. We implemented a nonce endpoint, which solves some of the issues people were having with having to do multiple user interactions to get signatures because the nonce might expire or they didn't have a nonce and so on. So that's been a good change. The credential endpoint can now issue batches of the same credential. So this is important for unlinkability with both MDoc and SDJOT. So because the signatures on these credentials could be used as a correlating factor if they're presented to multiple verifiers or presented to the same verifier multiple times with different claims disclosed. Issuing batches of these things which each have a different signature, they essentially become single use, and the wallet only uses them once, and that avoids a type of linkability. So that now works nicely in OpenID for verifiable credentials issuance. And that meant we could remove the batch endpoint, which is good because there were a whole load of problems with the batch endpoint that we couldn't solve really. And it was overly complex. So again, really good change that we got positive developer feedback about. We removed authorization pending in favor of deferred issuance because again, we've got some security concerns. We removed the CW proof type because we basically got feedback that nobody was using it. We have the same type identifier change for SDJOT. And that's it. So the next one is high assurance interoperability, pronounced HYPE. We did the first implementers draft of that. I think that only got published a week or two ago, maybe. Yeah, a week ago. So I think the big recent changes there are that it now includes an MDoc presentation profile over the digital credentials API that I just mentioned in the browser. We've actually been working really closely with the ISO group that defines the MDoc spec, so we're expecting this to be referenced in a future revision of 18013-7 as an NXT. We're working with them on the details of that. And the other big breaking change that we've made kind of just before the implements draft is that specification now mandates DUCL, the new query language. Again, so much positive developer feedback that it made sense to just mandate that everywhere. The browser vendors were really keen on it. Everybody was really keen on this. And other things we're working on now, for all the reasons I just explained, we're actually going just literally Friday, remove presentation exchange entirely from OpenID for VP. So do appreciate that's a breaking change for a lot of existing implementers, but yeah, the feedback we've had about DUCL just pushed us that this was the right time to do this. Sorry to the people that have implemented it, but yeah, we firmly believe that this is the right thing, and having only one query language in the spec is a massive simplification for everyone that needs to do it. We did debates about trusted authorities, and we also looked at multi-RP authentication, it's called, which is basically figuring out how to deal with the fact that when a verifier makes these requests, it doesn't know which wallet's going to receive it, so it doesn't necessarily know how to authenticate to the wallet before it sends the request, because it doesn't know which wallet's going to get it. So this multi-RP authentication actually provides a mechanism where the verifier can authenticate in multiple ways in a single request, and then the wallet can pick the one that it actually recognizes. OpenID for VCI. We've got a whole load of issues to resolve that are tagged with 1.0. I don't think there's any really big ones. And we're focused on doing interop testing on implementers draft 2. So hopefully we're going to have some implementations of that in a month or so, which should be in time to get any feedback from developers pulled into the specs before they actually go final. And with HYPE, actually, I just mentioned, yeah, we're talking with the ISO MDoc working group about aligning on that new annex in HYPE and how to get it referenced in the ISO specs. And yeah, for sessions, we're calling IIW this week. We do have a bit of a list. Tim's going to call a thrilling session on error codes, I believe, and layering. Yeah. And many of my colleagues from Germany want to call a whole load of sessions as well, so do keep an eye out. I think there's a possibility that the OpenID for VC 101 session will be run. So if you're interested in that, let us know. Yeah, that was the main ones. And we're also doing a lot of work on conformance tests at the moment. So speaking with my DCP co-chair hat on at the moment, I'll talk about conformance tests in a little bit with my certification director hat on as well. So we already have, sorry, which order am I doing these in? Yeah, so we just developed alpha tests for verifiable credential issuance for both issuers and wallets. They're using the implementers draft that was just released plus hype. We're focusing on SDJOTs to start with. And we're at the point where we've got a test that we think is probably roughly right and should do something useful, but we don't have any actual issuers or wallets that support this draft yet to test them against. Hopefully we'll within the next few weeks, but if anybody has one or is going to have one very soon, please let me know and we'll help you run the initial tests and see how well your implementation has done and see how well our tests have done actually implementing the spec correctly or otherwise. And we've also had tests for a while for verifiable presentations for wallets. So those were relatively recently updated to support the implementers draft 3. They've got MDoc support in there. They're targeting that draft 24 I mentioned because of those MDoc changes that are important. And we're also covering that browser API that I mentioned. And again, that's the spec that we hope ISO ends up adopting and publishing in part 7. And we actually did some interop in that in the Netherlands, I think it's either last month or the month just before. So we had quite a lot of successful interop tests there. So that protocol is looking good. We did get little bits of feedback. We're fixing the spec, and I found a bug in the tests and found plenty of bugs in people's wallets. And all that's getting fixed, so we're in good shape. And a relatively recent addition was the test for verifiers. So yeah, we've run a bunch of verifiers through this test. It supports the latest implementers draft as well as the older one. Did find some bugs in the verifiers again. But yeah, those tests are there. There's a link to the instructions that you can't actually see on the slides, but because it's got the Zoom window over it. But yeah, there's instructions on the website that you should be able to find relatively easy if you just click on certifications and then instructions and look for verifiable credentials. Yeah, that was my last slide. So any questions about DCP and verifiable credentials? Oh, George.
I'm curious around verifiers' perspectives around the complexity. It seems like multi-RP needing, I need to ask for, first name, last name, address, right? And I can't get all of that out of a single credential. So now I'm trying to figure out how to spread my attributes across different credentials. We don't have a common, attribute naming mechanism across credentials. And I guess I'm worried that we're creating an ecosystem that's very complex for verifiers, which may push toward, you have to have some third-party software that does it for you, which then increases the cost, which makes ROI harder, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a reasonable fear to have. I think we're at early days. We do have a lot of competing credential formats. I will say that people are trying to evolve this thing as best as they can in the right direction. So for example, the EU recently published version 1.8 of their architecture reference framework, which actually defines some standard claims for SDJOT PIDs, which actually just builds on top of the existing OpenID Connect and the eKYC specification that Hadari talked about earlier. Wherever they could, they just reuse those existing claims that are already in the IANA job registry. So people are trying to do sensible things and keep things standard. But yeah, I mean, it is definitely a more difficult thing for verifiers to do than, say, traditional OpenID Connect. And I think that's just the nature of the beast. It is more complex to do this three-party model. And we need to figure out the best solutions to get people to actually do the verifiers right and properly. I cannot predict the future, but yeah, I hope we'll see some good open source implementations. I hope we'll see some good commercial implementations that have sensible commercial models that mean we see good adoption. Any more questions?
Questions online?
I think we're good. I can sit down for a bit.
Small break. Great, thanks. And any of the users like Lee and Helen and Paul, I see through the woodwork to the others.
Feel free, we're going to ask you to speak up and share your experiences on the interop sessions at the end, but this is just a quick recap on what's been happening. Clicker, let's try one forward. No. Oh, went forward too many. There we go. So we were asked, or was suggested by Ryan Galuzzo at NIST, that we think about doing a kind of series of interop, small group interops to prove out the tests, since prove out the specifications and the tests, because so much work was happening so quickly, and the timelines were all quite aggressive. So we put together a string of events on February 20th for UTRIC, the official kind of, or unofficial side-by-side with the ISO event on March 1st. And then we've already just had one last Friday. So these results you're hearing today are coming in real hot. Juliana will kick off the results from the most recent interop, but we'll also have a couple of more coming up on the 25th of April, and then another one on, or two, I should say, on the 5th of May. And those two events will be to help inform many of the key stakeholders, like our friends, not only at NIST and the European Commission and Japan, so on the government side, but also our SDO partners like ISO, who are very closely engaged with us on how our respective specs can interoperate with each other. So a lot of critical reasons for doing this and demand from the community to host these events. Over to you.
Okay, so just to give people an idea who may not know NIST, I am not NIST. I'm Juliana from Microsoft. I'm on the Identity Standards team, but I am the lead for Microsoft for the NCCOE project for accelerating digital identity on mobile driver's licenses, on digital identity on mobile devices or mobile driver's licenses. We have 3 different use cases. The first, which we're engaged in right now, is for KYC CIP requirements for opening a bank account and recurring access at high assurance levels to meet the regulatory requirements for the banks. So in that context, I want to step back and describe the purpose behind these interop events, because it's a really necessary context for you to understand the results we're seeing, where we are with the results, and where we're going with the results. So essentially, our role at Microsoft is we are the platform, the IAM platform, supporting multiple wallets, a single verifier, which is Matters verifier, to be able to present an MDL, extract those MDL claims into the IAM platform, and to manage and create a user account for the financial institution and subsequent recurring access. In that particular context, it's really important to understand that we need to be the architecture behind this needs to be independent of the wallet, and it needs to be independent of the verifier, independent of the protocols used, and the data sets that are used. So these interop tests are a result of our maintaining a very firm position that the platform needs to be completely independent, completely vendor neutral, and non-Microsoft specific, although we're using our Entra platform for it, that any IAM platform should be able to come in and be able to do the same thing. And in that way, we should be able to get real measurable, clear results across the wallets through the verifier to the extraction of the claims, and provide valuable insights back to the community, both the ISO community for MDL, to the protocol development through OpenID Foundation and other protocols that may or may not get developed, to the wallet providers themselves, as well as to advance the understanding and the development of the verifier side of things as we move forward, so that we can start to apply not only the capability, but the scalability of these implementation in real world context. So there we go. So I'm not going to read this off, that I just basically explained what this is all about. The interop test, as Gail mentioned, supported multiple wallets and multiple data sets across a single verifier. And it's really important to understand that it supports MDOC format for both MDL as well for PID in the European context. So as I mentioned, really simply, what we've been testing here in the OpenID Foundation context, as well as for ISO MDL, is multiple wallets that we are blind to, multiple browsers, multiple operating systems, one verifier with Matter, and the NCCOE architecture. We've tested successfully with 5 profiles, Annex C, which is a profile from Ostrodes in Australia, and 4 different OpenID for VP configurations. That's our interop test that we successfully ran on April 4th, which was last Friday. And these are the results we're going to show you. Now, I'm going to, it may sound funny, but it's true. The reason I'm able to show you this is because I got ticked off that we weren't able to do remote interop testing remotely for ISO. We had to physically fly all over the world to be able to do these tests. So we built this architecture and we built insights into our Azure platform so we could provide all the parties with real-time information, hopefully to help advance all these specifications, as well as give our relying parties, the financial institution, an opportunity to understand how they too get visibility into what transpires between a wallet and a verifier and a holder in the presentation of their credentials. Wow, that's a huge eye chart that I can't even read. But essentially, what you're seeing up there is multiple wallets that tested last Friday, using all those different presentation profiles as well as protocol and the different data sets. What we were able to get, can I blow this up? Oops. Oh, there we go. I can see it here. So what we're seeing now, this is the real data that we've pulled and created a presentation so it makes sense from the logs from the verifier. And what you're seeing here is the different protocols or profiles and combinations that were used and the success rates that we saw. This is a substantial increase in success rate from what we did in Utrecht a month ago on March 1st. And really incredible from our perspective, insights into how far the wallets are advancing, how the specification for OpenID for VP is advancing as well. Yeah.
Just give you a subtle indicator about time.
Okay, I'll be real fast. So at the end of the day, what we're seeing is increasing success rates. We're seeing increasing stability on the profile for OpenID for VP and the different configurations. Where we're going next now is next interop events to be able to support and get insights into the advancement coming from the DCP working group, hoping to get to final for hype in the context of the ISO MDL 18013 remote presentation. So that's where we're going with it. That's what we've done. And hopefully this will now be a tool that we'll be able to use moving forward to test.
Brilliant. So the goal is obviously to get from where we are now, which is roughly about 87%, to 100% by 425. So we have a little bit of remediation to do between now and then. Where I'm chiming in is really more on the SD-JOT side, since the official scope of the NCCOE project and Microsoft's platform does not currently support SD-JOT. On the right-hand side, you can see across both MDOC and for MDOC, there were about 80 pairs that were tested with various configurations of encrypted, unencrypted, signed, and so forth. They were all passing bar 1 fail that was unsigned and 8 fail that were signed. And then on the SD-JOT, there's fewer implementations that are ready to test in different configurations. So 27 of those pairs passed and only one failure. A little ad hoc feedback from Helen this morning indicated some of the known gaps have already been closed even over the weekend. So we're seeing some really encouraging progress from these initial results, but we're still just over halfway through this process, right? So we're not yet expecting it to be 100%, just as people make sure they fine tune their own implementations. So far, we haven't heard anything major on feedback on the protocols themselves, which is encouraging. Not that we're avoiding it, but we haven't heard anything material on the protocol side. So we got two more dates to go, and on the 5th, we'll do a very detailed demo for our SDO and government stakeholder partners in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we'll do a public webinar where we seek to invite many of the LSPs, many of the our SDO partners writ large, and the wider community to kind of listen in on the progress. So with that, just want to see whether Paul or Lee or any of the other implementers who have been taking part so far, if you have any comments.
It's been very useful. I think like the main thing is, well, one, the number of successes we're getting is really, really encouraging. Like we're at the point now where we're starting to talk to, fairly large companies about going and implementing OpenID for VP in like production, right? And to get that level of confidence to go out there and say these specs are ready, these interop events, one, they help us, know that our own implementations are good, like Google Wallet, we have something to test against. And we definitely really appreciate things like the certification suites. Like we now actually have 4 more things that we can go and test against. So we have confidence, we can go out and talk to these big companies and say this stuff's actually going to work. It also gives us confidence that other people can read the same, set of words and produce the same implementation without lots and lots of back channeling, right? I think a lot of the stuff where in the past we've only really got things to work because you all have to work together, really. But now people can go and read this document like completely independently and produce implementations that interop with no pre-testing. That's pretty cool. That's definitely miles and more advanced than where we've ever been before. And and the results are really, really good. So I'm kind of hoping we can get to May the 5th. Turn up, get, near 100% success rates across all of these wallets. I would like to publish these results at some point. Google can do a little bit of publishing of this stuff too. And it gives us something really, really solid that we can go out and say like OpenID for PEP is ready for, it's open for business. You can run these certification suites. If you pass them, it's going to work, and it's going to work in an interop way across potentially hundreds of wallets if you could all the EU, and hopefully tens of thousands of verifiers out there on the internet. So it's really, really good.
You want anything? You're good.
So these results are based on the OpenID conformance test.
So this includes the test suite as a verifier, essentially. So that is one of the results, if you will. It is available, as you kind of heard from Joseph earlier, the OID for VP test using DC API for SD-JOT and MDoc is available. And then on the VCI side, it's in the kind of alpha, very initial phase.
That is a really good segue to our last presenter, but is there any urgent pressing question in the room?
I'm just going to add that we'll be doing, Oliver and Bill Fisher from NIST and I will be doing a session at IIW. Bring your own wallet, test it, see what you get.
So other implementers are welcome to reach out and engage. This is a small group of known active implementers that we just convened to start proving out the tests. So if you are an active implementer of OID for VP or VCI, please reach out to Juliana, myself, Joseph, and we're happy to loop you in. The critical requirement is passing the test. You can build your implementation to the test. And I know most have expressed some interest in taking part by 425, so we can talk to that offline.
Question from your title slide. What is NCCM?
National Center for Cybersecurity of Excellence. Or the other way around, National Cybersecurity Center for Excellence.
It's a structure that allows for this type of method. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question about the scalability, about the application and the protocol. My name is Ayuni from MFG. I'm also working for financial institution management. So we're pretty much interested in the like a more standard protocol right now. But on the other hand, you have tested with quite a small batch or something like that, so you feel like, the have a scalability about this project, or is it doesn't matter, it doesn't have any issue around it, or should we also tested about it?
We're not seeing any scalability issues at this time.
Thank you.
I think at this point we've tested with a significant percentage of the wallets that we expect to ever exist, so.
Let you go. That's your
Yep. So I shall talk about conformance and certification now, although I shall just briefly go back to the DCP working group, because I think I forgot to put on my slides that we've also been working very closely with the EC, with our liaison with them. We just submitted 2 of the specs to them to go into one of their review processes. And we're trying to get final specs out by the end of into the process by the end of June, all with the aim that we're working very closely with them to make sure that when the EU implementing acts are next revised, all of VCI, VP and HYPE specifications from OpenID Foundation should be explicitly referenced. Yeah. Yes, European Commission. Sorry, I keep on using the abbreviation. So yes, working very closely with our colleagues in Europe to make sure that happens and meets their needs. Oh, okay, so conformance and certification. I'll be pretty brief on this. I've already mentioned a few of the bits. So the certification team is working on quite a few different specs in parallel at the moment. The team is bigger than it was this time last year, so that's good, because otherwise there's no way we'd be able to cope. I think even with the bigger team, we're barely coping, but we're used to doing a lot with a small team, so this is good. So FAPI, we did roll out support for Depop some time ago. That's been live for a while. We've had a few certifications for that, so that's all good. So as I mentioned, we're focusing on getting the FAPI 2 final tests rolled out. Should have beta tests this month, and then we'll launch a certification program as soon as we can get some testing to actually show that those tests are doing what we expect them to do. We're working on tests for the Federation spec you've heard about earlier. We again have some beta tests for those already. There's an interop event planned, which the certification test will again be taking part in. So we're continuing to develop those tests. We should have a new test that actually does an automatic registration flow ready in time for those interop events, for those people to test before the interop. And then EKYC, we're continuing to work with the working group. We've had tests for that spec for a while. Edmund's doing some work to upgrade them. And we're having some discussions with the working group to figure out exactly what a certification program for those specs will look like. Yeah, having the specs is great, but we do actually need some kind of interoperability minimum compliance level to actually have certifications. Otherwise, we're not actually hitting the goal of our certifications, which is to achieve interoperability. Shared signals, which again, you've already heard about the spec. We've been developing tests for those. They were used as a pre-requirement for the recent interop that happened at Gartner London. Lots of good feedback there. We found some bugs in implementations. The tests seem to be working well, and we'll continue to work on those over the next few months. It's mainly the transmitters that we've been testing so far. We're starting testing receivers as well. And we'll continue to work with the working group. And as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of work on testing for OpenID for verifiable credentials again. We've already got beta tests for a lot of this, particularly verifiable presentations, as you just heard in the interop. Those tests took part in the interop as a verifier. And we've got the tests for the verifiable credential issuance that are coming up. So again, if you've got implementations of that, the latest draft, please let me know. Be here all week. I'll help you run the tests. It'll be great. And we're also, again, talking with our colleagues at the European Commission about how potentially they could use these tests as well and what that would look like. So that's an ongoing conversation. I think that's my only slide, right? Yes. So yeah, any questions about conformance testing and certification? Almost exactly on time, so I shall hand over to Elizabeth to close us out.
I really like the part where I get to take a picture of all your beautiful faces. So can I get you all, if you consent,
Smushing together in kind of the middle of the group, and I think because we have these here, and people online turn on their cameras, we can we can be inclusive.
Stop the share.
Yeah, let's stop the share, get them up. Turn on your cameras and smush together. Thank you. No, I mean, if they stand here.
I'm gonna stand under there.
Yeah, just slide down. We don't need to make this stressful. You can't be sitting at the back. I appreciate y'all doing this. It's my favorite time of the year because I get to see you. All right. I might need people at the front to do your squats.
Go up in a chair.
Yep.
There's a green chair.
Yeah, don't do that.
I just need, could you just move Marie just a little closer?
You see Marie?
I see Marie now and I see, yep, Joseph's in it. Okay. Did I do one with me in it? Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
You're free to leave unless you're a board member, and then you're on the hook for another 2 hours.
Thank you all so much for sticking with us online. Really, really, here, I'll even. Thank you. Steph, thanks for staying up so late. Bye.